Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Well, congratulations on your acquisition, clapped Andrew on the shoulder. Ben, the former shop owner. Thanks, the man replied with a friendly nod in return. He was 37, and by that age he had already established a whole chain of small stalls and kiosks. However, it was time to expand. Gathering his resolve, Andrew had saved up some money and decided to open one large premises to do some serious business. I would have liked to build my own from scratch, of course, but I only had enough money to buy it, the new owner said regretfully. Come on, a building is a building, Ben said. I'm tired of just trading, so I'm giving it away for next to nothing. So time to conquer new horizons. Of course, you can't get results without action. You have to try different things. In fact, Andrew knew. The company was on the verge of ruin. Why the shop was suffering such losses, God only knows. Maybe it was bad management, or maybe Ben just wasn't equipped to run a serious business. That's what happens when people who have no entrepreneurial sense at all go into business. Don't insult my employees. It's a good team, the former owner asked earnestly. We'll see. You need to get acquainted. In trade, you need control. Andrew did not promise anything concrete. The employees were transferred to him and the load with the purchase. The man was not against such a bonus. After all, it was the only way to avoid wasting the time needed to recruit and train new staff. But personnel purges were still coming, albeit not so radical. Some of them would leave on their own, having failed to get along with a new boss, and others would be caught up in petty affairs that escaped Ben's not-so-attentive eye. That's it. Here's the keys. Own it, as they say. The former owner perked up. Cheers. If you need anything, come in. Andrew escorted the now guest out. He went into the small cubbyhole that had been set aside as an office and began going through the statements. Listen, what's this weird loss you keep having at the end of the month? He said, catching the kid trying to scurry past. I don't know. I'm just a loader here. Ask the cashiers or the manager, the man shrugged. Oddly enough, those fellows didn't tell me anything intelligible either. On the surface, everything in the paperwork looked normal, at least not overtly suspicious. But Andrew felt that the answer to why his former colleague had gone bankrupt was lurking somewhere nearby. Do you maybe need someone? Like a checker of some sort. Someone inconspicuous, the loader still standing next to him continued. Yes, to look from the outside, to see what's going on. You understand, no one will tell about their own offenses. And where would I find such a person? Andrew wondered. There seem to be sites on the internet specifically for this sort of thing. There you can find a person who for a one-off payment will give you some kind of expertise. I've seen something like that on TV. What's the name? Who? You. Andrew raised an eyebrow. Ah, Bill. That's great, Bill. Let's get acquainted. The man shook the outstretched hand. Satisfied with the attention, the loader went about his business. Andrew actually thought about his offer. A site from the internet, even if such a site existed, was not suitable at all. Firstly, additional costs. It is not a fact that such expertise will be cheap, any now unnecessary expenses. Secondly, outsiders in such sensitive issues have never been trusted by the entrepreneur, especially one time. And what prevents the inspector to agree with the employees, and for a certain price to cover up their violations, thus receiving double earnings? Yes, the idea isn't bad, but the execution is, Andrew muttered, not addressing anyone in particular. His wandering gaze came across a small purse, probably forgotten by one of the female employees on the table. Shouldn't I come in disguised as a customer of the shop myself? He glanced in the mirror hanging nearby. Dark brown hair neatly slicked back. A well-groomed beard and an attentive gaze gave his face an expressive and inner strength. Too primitive. I'll have to disguise myself, Andrew thought, twirling the document in his hands. The idea of personally checking the integrity of the staff during maintenance and routine tasks seemed too tempting. Can't be helped. I'm on my way by 12 or so. Tell the manager to keep everyone working as usual. Andrew winked at the girls at the register. They nodded at him, smiling pleasantly at their new boss. Having prepared everything necessary, the entrepreneur went out of the door, got into the car and headed for a long-known theater makeup shop. It was necessary to work a little on his appearance, so that no one would accidentally recognize him during the inspection. Stopping in front of an unremarkable building, Andrew looked sadly at the familiar sign. Memories of his years at the theater school, where he had learned how to transform himself into different characters with the help of makeup long before he opened his first shop, came to mind. He seriously dreamed of a career as an actor, but life decided otherwise, forcing the budding artiste into a more lucrative endeavor. "Oh, look who I see." The salesman rejoiced when he saw the visitor. "How do you do, Mr. Albert?" Andrew smiled. "Fine," replied the salesman as animatedly as ever. And the shopkeeper and Andrew had met at the same time, in the days of their carefree youth. Mr. Albert had grown a little older since then, but he seemed to have lost none of his vigor and optimism. "I hear you and Gwen got married. How is she?" friendly asked the old acquaintance. "Oh, Andrew faltered, not knowing whether to speak. "Died in childbirth." "How so? Poor little girl." "We had a rough one, and the baby died with its mum." "What on earth is this?" Mr. Albert splashed his hands. The man came out from behind the counter and gave Andrew a fatherly hug to express his condolences. There was not much to say, for no words could soothe the wounds of the heart. If it hadn't been for his old friendship, Andrew would never have spoken about it. But the owner of the dressing room shop had always been kind to them, and in his time had done a lot of good for aspiring actors, becoming a real mentor. "How on earth did you manage?" Mr. Albert muttered bitterly. "To tell you the truth, I nearly went mad. Good thing my second son survived, helped me not lose myself. Now I'm raising him on my own," Andrew said. He rummaged in his pocket, then took out his wallet, where he kept a photograph of a 5-year-old boy. Mr. Albert looked closely at the photo, noting the mole on the little boy's arm. "Rich boy. Looks just like you," the man said warmly. "My only ray of light in life. I do everything for his sake. I opened my own business when the acting career, I know, it's been hard on everyone. Your generation even more so. And then what happened? You never met anyone else?" Mr. Albert asked cautiously. "I met them a few years later, when I finally came to my senses," Andrew admitted reluctantly. He was embarrassed to announce his new marriage, as if he were betraying the memory of Gwen. "And how's it going with the new wife? All is well?" Mr. Albert inquired. "Generally, yes, but they don't get on with the baby. She's not particularly fond of Michael." Still hoping that someday their relationship will change, Andrew shook his head sadly. "Yeah, who wants to raise someone else's child? At the time, I thought the kids definitely needed a mum." "It'll get better," Mr. Albert nodded cheerfully. "But to me, for old time's sake, or what?" Andrew shook himself, chasing away the sadness caused by the tale of the past, and then briefly outlined his plan to his old mentor. "Well, I won't solve all the problems, but I'll definitely help with this one." He smiled. "You're a fancy man, of course, but I like that you don't lose your creativity in life." After a while, they had everything they needed ready, and the old mate even helped Andrew transform into his new look. The entrepreneur examined himself critically in the mirror, then smiled contentedly. "Thank you, Mr. Albert. Excellent, as always. And don't forget to leave your car away from the shop so they can't see what you're driving," the salesman said sternly. Andrew nodded understandingly, paid, and headed for the exit. The journey back didn't take long. Leaving the car on a nearby street, he adjusted his fake glasses, put on a baseball cap, and entered his shop. "Hello," Andrew said hello, barely as the sliding doors closed behind him. The security guard didn't even look in his direction. Staring at the screen of his smartphone, the black uniformed law enforcement officer was clearly idling, paying no attention to what was going on in the hall. "They'll take out half the stock," Andrew muttered, making a mental note. It can't just be petty thieves causing such a loss. He slowly moved on, looking at the display of goods on the shelves. I must say that the variety of offers was literally rippling in the eyes. But everything was somehow crooked, sloppy, and completely haphazard. "Damn it," Andrew cursed, slipping because of the recent rain. The floor was covered in liquid mud that customers had dragged on their shoes in abundance, but the cleaner was in no hurry to tidy up the place. The disregard for cleanliness was also evident in the thick layer of dust in the unshaded areas, the overflowing rubbish bins, the wrappers lying here and there. "Why is your place so dirty?" Andrew asked unhappily, seeing a woman in a blue apron who was only pretending to work, uselessly sweeping a mop across the floor. "What's it to you? You're the boss," the cleaning lady snapped at him. "You don't have to be snippy either. I'll also mop you right now. What do you think you're doing? If you don't like it, go to the shop next door. They're spread out in front of everyone there. I've got my eyes all over them. I can't take it anymore," the cleaning lady said with a furious wave of her hands. An angry Andrew did not even argue. He just walked on, trying to calm down. Here comes the first candidate for dismissal. Such sloppiness in the workplace cannot go unpunished. The new owner's next target was the grocery shelf. At first, he just wanted to see if the goods were conveniently laid out, but he was surprised to find a huge amount of expired goods. And it's in the most visible place. Andrew shook his head unhappily. He remembered the delivery notes he had been going through this morning. Even then, he had noticed that the manager was ordering more goods from suppliers than a shop of this size could normally sell. Why organize such a large shipment and then have everything stand around and spoil? Suddenly, Andrew heard an elderly voice. "There you go, sweetheart, move over a little." A smiling granny stood beside him. "Careful, they have a lot of expired stuff here," Andrew said quietly as he began to scrutinize the price tags on the Kefir fridge. "That makes sense. That's what a sale is. Where else would you buy it at this price? And nothing. It's only a couple of days past its expiry date. That's something me and my kitty can drink quickly. We've never been poisoned." "Does that happen a lot around here?" "Did you fall out of the sky?" Grandma was surprised. "Look around, where there's a green price tag, it's expired. They give it away for pennies. It's the only way I survive on my pension." "But it's forbidden." Andrew couldn't believe it. "But the workers are not stupid, so they've made a deal somehow. The local manager taught us to do it himself. He was always telling us at first how to buy economically." Andrew, disbelieving, began to look around. Here and there he noticed green cards with numbers on them. Meat department, baked goods, tinned goods, baby food. Literally every shelf was lined with items that had to be disposed of immediately. "So that's what this is all about," Andrew muttered, to which the realization finally came. The shop manager turned out to be not at all as simpleton as the new owner had originally thought of him. The huge deliveries turned out not to be a mistake, but a deliberate scheme in which unusable products were written off on the books, while in reality they sat quietly on the shelf under the guise of promotional items. "So you hand me the documents by which all this good was supposedly disposed of. But in fact nothing is thrown away, and the markdown is dispersed much faster than normal goods. And the most important thing is that you can put the money for this expired goods in your pocket, because according to the documents, it no longer exists. It's brilliant." Andrew snapped his fingers. He was about to stop checking and head to his office when he saw a very blatant picture. "You're loitering around again. I've told you many times not to scare away customers," the guard muttered, looking away from the phone. "What have I done to you?" exclaimed a wheelchair user who had stopped at the shelf with expired goods. "I told you to get out of here. You're holding everyone up, getting in the way. You're running your own almshouse. You're a loss." "What am I supposed to do, starve to death?" "What do I care? You can shop wherever you want." Andrew didn't understand the security guard's abruptness. The man in the wheelchair looked quite tidy and did not look like a homeless person, but rather a stranded man. In any case, such an attitude towards a customer who had done nothing wrong required intervention, albeit incognito. "What do you think you're doing?" "The man is disabled," Maybe he needs help, and you're making him look bad for no reason. Andrew was outraged. What's wrong? There was a new voice. The manager came out of his office when he heard the commotion in the sales room. His face was contorted with a grimace of contempt, and he was clearly determined to put an end to any disturbance. Your security guard is violating customers' rights, Andrew said unashamedly. Why do you care? The manager raised an eyebrow. It's wrong. A lot of things are wrong in our country. Why did you decide to start your noble struggle with our shop? Andrew gasped at this insolence. It seems that a serious scandal was looming ahead. All right. It's time to end this mess, said the new owner. Taking off his baseball cap, he took a wet napkin from his pocket, threw off his fake glasses, wiped his face from makeup, and returned to his more familiar appearance. My name is Andrew. I'm your new owner. Scott Cooper, replied the manager. Now explain what's going on here. You see, here's the thing. Scott was clearly accustomed to feeling like the boss, and he was shocked by this strange transformation. He had no idea what to say to justify his actions. After all, the unprofessionalism was more than obvious. I'm sorry, it's my fault. It's been a rough do. It's a bit of a mess. Change of management. Well, you should be able to understand that. I'm sorry about that. You know, I don't really care about your emotional state. There's no excuse for treating customers like this. By the way, I apologize on behalf of the company. Andrew turned to the wheelchair user, but suddenly froze when he saw familiar features. Not without difficulty, but he still recognized in the downcast poor man a surgeon who had once worked in the maternity ward. Why do you look like that? The cripple was wary. Don't you recognize him? Andrew said quietly. Didn't you perform a cesarean on my wife a few years ago? Young man, do you know how many operations I've performed in my time? And now you're condemned to a miserable existence in a wheelchair. What is that, if not the ultimate justice? Tragic accident, the former surgeon stepped on himself. He wanted to move away from the shelf, but Andrew stood right in front of him, blocking the way to retreat. And how does one live after committing a crime? What crime? What are you talking about? The man stormed off. My wife's death is on your conscience. And you don't even have to say no. Young, healthy, no pathologies. Don't think I couldn't put two and two together to realize that it was the unfortunate operation that finished her off. I don't know what you're talking about. Gwen Brown. Don't you dare say you don't remember one. Gwen. The crippled man's eyes were sustained by a haze of recollection. So I'm her husband. Poor girl. Exactly. Live and let live, raising children. I wasn't the one who performed the surgery that day. Andrew, the former doctor, sniped. What? He silently picked up his basket of groceries, set it on his lap, and went to the checkout counter. The stunned shopkeeper didn't even try to stop him, only escorting the man who had paid with his eyes. The former surgeon drove out into the street. Andrew followed him, still watching in silence as he awkwardly walked down the ramp. What happened that day? Andrew asked, finally deciding to catch up with the wheelchair user. He stopped, clutched the bag of expired goods to his chest, and stared pensively into the distance. I used to be addressed respectfully as Mr. Kevin, but now, the cripple sighed sorrowfully. Ex-surgeon. Tell me everything as it happened. I need to know who was responsible for Gwen's death. Yes, pretty much business as usual. I asked Johnson to perform the surgery. Normal practice for a hospital. Why didn't you do it yourself? Andrew interjected. Couldn't get to work on time. Your wife went into labor early in the morning and I didn't get there until lunchtime. Car caught fire. It was parked outside the house and it went up in flames. It was set on fire. I'm sure fires like that don't just happen by themselves. I don't believe it. Did you see the documents with your name on them with your own eyes, or will you deny it? I repent. That's just it, my fault. I asked you not to say I was late so I wouldn't waste time. If only I had known how it would turn out, I would have regretted it 100 times over. Your wife's death has had a lot of repercussions for me, too. I can't believe it. Andrew shook his head in surprise. It's true, of course. But you don't seem to have any reason to lie. The man looked at the crippled man, and the crippled man was still clutching the bag of stale food in his hands. Something terrible has clearly happened to him, breaking not only his physical body, but his soul as well. After that incident, I was dragged through the authorities. Checks, reports. The hospital tried to stay clean and made all the ends meet with one scapegoat. In general, broke my career. He even wept, furtively brushed the moisture from his eyes. They stopped trusting operations. It's hard when you lose a job you love for nothing. What are you trying to make me feel sorry for you? Andrew raised an eyebrow. No, I'm just telling you. You asked for it. And then your wife got angry, the ex-doctor said. They stood for a moment. The silence hung too heavy between them. It demanded intervention. The dislike of one for the other was a necessity, like a lingering disease. All right, what's the occasion? Andrew was the first to break the silence. It's a well-known matter. I started drinking. Thought it might dull the sadness. Then, as usual, the wife left. Right, why should she, a prominent woman, put up with the antics of a novice alcoholic? She found a better match and ran away. It's not like there's anything to blame her for. Of course, her new husband had already become head of the department by then. So much for that. I don't envy you, Andrew said. I can't say I entirely condone it, but I sympathize. I guess it's fate. You shouldn't blame fate either. She didn't take your legs from you. Yeah, that's right, Kevin replied. It's just that I started drinking even more, just to the point of insanity. Then one day I got behind the wheel and had an accident. No one to blame. I did it with my own hands. Hit a lamppost. Good thing I didn't kill anyone. I only hurt myself. That's how it is. Andrew shrugged. There was nothing to say. Just as any apology couldn't make up for his own hard action. No words of encouragement could help the former surgeon. It was evident how difficult it was for Kevin to tell this story, revealing the very depths of his soul to the stranger. Now that we've met, there's something else. He gathered his strength. I saw your boys that day, didn't I? The twins are not just brothers, but like two drops of water alike, both have a birthmark on their hands. How? That can't be. The hospital never told me anything like that, Andrew perked up. Here's a cross for you, Kevin waved his hand. But that's not the most important thing. I think about it every time. Maybe it's a mistake, but I'd swear there were no birthmarks on the supposedly dead boy's body. What do you mean there were none? Exclaimed the dumbfounded interlocutor. Wait a minute. Do you mean? Andrew did not finish the sentence. Afraid to scare away the hope that had arisen. Not even hope. Its ghostly silhouette, which he did not want to let into his own mind yet. I'm inclined to believe that a forgery has been done. Don't joke like that. Andrew loomed over the former surgeon. I don't think I'm in the right mood for jokes. Enduring the angry look of his interlocutor, Kevin continued. I couldn't prove anything. I didn't have time for that. To be honest, there was some bullying at work. Then I forgot all about it. Then why are you telling me? I just saw him the other day, I guess. Look, if this is your way of bullying. I've seen that boy. Believe me, I have, Kevin shouted. He's more alive than ever. He was walking in the park with his nanny. I'd swear on anything, or rather, on what's left. Andrew froze, feeling his heart pounding frantically in his chest. Is my son really alive? But how do I verify these words? Andrew muttered, more to himself than to his interlocutor. Easily enough. The sons are twins, after all, retorted the surgeon. If you see them, you'll know right away for sure. Andrew looked at him again. Kevin's eyes were filled with a glimmer of life, as if he, too, had been caught up in the excitement of the sudden truth. It didn't last long, though. The wheelchairman shrank back almost immediately, taking on his usual, already absent look. Pity about you a bit, Andrew muttered. There are places to go. I've done without your pity. Kevin replied. The crippled man tried to detour around his interlocutor, but the latter held him back. Come on, don't be stubborn. Come stay with me for a while, get cleaned up, get back to normal. I'll manage on my own. Throw away the stale stuff. Andrew burst out, snatching the ill-fated bag out of his hands. We'll go to my place now. It's a big house, there's plenty of room for everyone. Leave me alone. I don't want these presents. Listen, you don't need to talk to me with these phrases. Whoever hurt you, we have nothing in common. I'd like to hold a grudge against you. But I look at you and I want to do a good deed. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart. So let's go. At the same time, you can tell me where you saw the boy and his nanny, so we can check it out. The ex-surgeon grumbled something, but he didn't push any further. Andrew helped him into the car, folded and then put the old pram in the boot. They spent the journey in silence. There didn't seem to be anything between them that needed to be said out loud. Eventually, they reached the large country house where the businessman and his family lived. Annie was already waiting on the doorstep with her arms crossed over her chest and a displeased look on her face. She didn't like the fact that her husband was late for work. When she saw Kevin rolling down the garden path, she frowned. "Who have you brought here?" she shouted as soon as the men appeared on the porch. "You brought a tramp into the house. Have you gone mad? Haven't they taught you manners or something?" Andrew was indignant. "How do you greet your guests?" "Nothing," Kevin whispered, but it was obvious that the tramp had hurt him. Tears came to his eyes again. He tried to wipe them away with his dirty fingers, but his hands were treacherously shaking, making it impossible to do so discreetly. The master of the house even felt embarrassed by his wife's rudeness. In the end, Annie didn't even try to take in the situation, starting her outrage right from the doorstep. Kevin isn't a tramp. Just a man in a difficult life situation. Andrew stood up for the former surgeon. "Why do you always argue with me?" Annie continued. "Oh, that's it. I don't care about scandals right now. Let me pass." The man brushed it off. He was not at all concerned now with another quarrel with his wife. The fate of his second son completely occupied Andrew's mind, pushing everything else to the background. "What's it come to, hasn't it? Michael's brother has just been stolen," the businessman muttered, turning to Kevin. In the most criminal and unconscionable way possible, the guest nodded in reply. "I don't know who had the conscience to do it, but someone must have paid a lot of money." "Something you're talking about?" Annie perked up her ears. "None of your business." Andrew brushed it off. "Kevin, why don't you tell me about the place where you saw them last time?" "Not far from your shop, by the way. I can't go all over town. If I saw something, it's not far from our neighborhood." But not to go, was taken aback at the words of his interlocutor by the landlord. Yes, we have a park near here. You know, near Victory Square. I collect bottles there sometimes. So, one morning I saw them there on the playground, a boy and a nanny with him. A respectable girl, expensive clothes. Apparently not a poor family hired her, Kevin said. Been so close all this time. The men went into the house, where Andrew had arranged the promised dinner for Kevin. He ate furtively and clearly embarrassed by his situation, but with gusto, as if he hadn't seen a proper meal in a very long time. Now all that remains is to figure out how to find out where they live, the landlord muttered thoughtfully. "Why?" Kevin retorted, chewing on another portion. "Don't ask stupid questions." "No, I mean you could just wait for them in the park. I'm sure they're there for a reason. They walk every day, or periodically at least." Both the kid and the babysitter looked so relaxed, like it wasn't the first time they'd come to this particular park. "Are you suggesting we set up a stakeout?" "That's an option. It'd be easier to follow her than knocking on doors randomly." The very next day, Andrew donned dark glasses and a well-worn baseball cap, then settled down on a remote bench. From this spot, the entire park was in plain view, giving him an unobtrusive view of its visitors. The enthusiastic man was burning with excitement to see his miraculously rescued son. "Third day walking already," Kevin muttered as he noticed Andrew packing. "I didn't think I'd have to keep watch this long." "Don't torture yourself. Maybe I was just mistaken?" "No, I feel like I'm getting close." Andrew left the former surgeon at his home again and stubbornly headed for the post. The familiar shop greeted almost cordially by now. Probably should have got some newspaper or book. The man was afraid of getting engrossed in the text and missing his son's appearance. He once again looked around the playground, but suddenly, with a sinking heart, he noticed familiar features, the same unruly hair, the same color eyes, and most importantly, a mole on his arm. As Kevin spoke, the boy was being watched closely by the nanny a short distance away. "Nicholas, be careful not to trip." The woman spoke softly as she followed the running child. "Nicholas, then. He looks just like him, Andrew whispered with parched lips. There was no doubt about it. Michael's lost brother, whom his father had thought dead all these years, was frolicking on the playground. Andrew shook off his stupor, rose resolutely from the bench, and headed for Nanny. On the way, he got rid of his glasses and tried to put a relaxed expression on his face. It was not at all necessary to frighten the woman. "Hello," he said in a friendly greeting as he approached the set. "Good afternoon," Nanny replied politely, looking at Andrew over her glasses. "It's not the first day I've seen you here, so I thought I'd introduce myself since we find ourselves here so often." The girl smiled back, but was in no hurry to take the initiative. Outwardly, she remained as serene as ever, but the company of a strange man made her tense up a little. Andrew noticed her furtively glancing around, making sure they weren't alone. "Oh, you don't think anything of it," the entrepreneur raised open palms. "I just have a son the same age, so I thought maybe we could come over tomorrow and the boys could play together." "Oh, right, of course," the nanny exhaled with relief. "My name is Veronica." The girl gingerly shook the outstretched hand while remembering to keep an eye on her charge. "How much your son looks like you," deliberately lied the man, watching the reaction of his new acquaintance. "Oh, no, I'm just a governess. A rich widow hired me. She wants to give her son a good education. So we're going out." "Sorry, that was awkward," Andrew smiled. "Poor woman. What happened to her husband?" "Probably not worth discussing," Veronica did. She tried to maintain a professional detachment, but it was obvious how eager she was to chat with at least someone. Andrew had already realized that the other mums weren't really on board with the governess, so she had to be bored for a few hours a day, while breathing fresh air on a walk. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Besides, how will your boss know you discussed it with me?" He smiled. "I guess you're right. The story's actually a sad one. Melissa's spouse crashed in an accident. Rumor has it he was abusing alcohol," the girl muttered, lowering her voice. "That's it." Andrew realized that he absolutely had to see the mysterious widow. After all, she could shed some light on the story that had happened to his children 5 years ago. Who knows, maybe Melissa even knew who had performed Gwen's surgery that day. "Oh, and he's so sharp too, he needs an eye on him," sorry, Veronica mumbled. She walked towards the child, who was playing to keep him from falling down the slide. The man gave her a thoughtful look. She wanted to find out the address and then rushed to find out the truth. But there was no way to act so hastily. They had to wait until the time allotted for the walk was over, and they were going home. "Well, we'll go," Veronica said, holding Nicholas' hand. "What street do you live on?" "It's not far, on 9th Avenue. "That's on the way. Come on, I'll walk you." Veronica nodded, happy to be able to continue the conversation. Andrew walked her all the way back to the house, pretending he had further to go. The hardest part was to peek at the flat number the girl dialed on the intercom. But the entrepreneur still got the cherished digits and now agonizingly decided when it was better to pay a visit. "And what? We're just going to break into her place like that?" Kevin asked after listening to the story. "Any other suggestions?" "I don't know, it's up to you. But she might put it out, though. I'll show Michael's picture. I'll explain everything." The very next day, Andrew stomped hesitantly to the front door, not knowing where to begin the difficult conversation. Among other things, he had to get the widow to open the door. "Who's there?" came a ringing voice when he did decide to dial the correct flat. "Hello, I'm the real father of your son, Nicholas. We need to talk, because I don't know if you're aware or not, but he has a twin brother, that they were separated from his children." Andrew recounted to Melissa everything he had been able to find out from the crippled doctor, as well as all the misadventures he had experienced during those years. She didn't interrupt her guest, listening intently and apparently assessing whether to believe the story. "You know, it always seemed to me that the situation was not so smooth," said the landlady at last. "What do you mean?" "It sounded like an excuse, but I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Everything was done by my late husband. May he rest in peace." The woman turned away, looking sadly out the window. Obviously, she didn't want to revisit the past, but Andrew's frankness compelled her to at least return the favor. She just couldn't imagine her father's dismay at finding out that his second baby boy was still alive and growing up in another family. "We were supposed to have an heir then too, except it just so happened that the pregnancy was going very hard. Doctors did what they could. However, the probability of miscarriage was too high. We hoped until the very last moment. Norman and I were waiting for this baby like a gift from heaven." Andrew was eager to get to the main point, but he dared not interrupt the revelations. Melissa continued to avoid his gaze, nervously rubbing a napkin that came to hand. "Our baby boy was stillborn," the woman said gravely. "Norman couldn't find a place for himself. Very upset, even angry. As I remember now," he said, "can I stay childless? It's out of status. I must have an heir." He was only interested in this at that moment. "Couldn't bear to speak out," Andrew pronounced. Apparently, Melissa nodded sadly. "To be honest, I didn't care about his feelings at the time. Rehab was hard. The doctors could barely get me out. If I'd given birth in a regular clinic, I probably wouldn't have survived." "Yeah, it sounds like you had a rough time too. But how did my boy end up with you?" Andrew genuinely sympathized with the widow. He even sympathized with her, but he had to be careful to steer her towards the right topic, to keep her from delving into the dark memories of the past. "I learned that later. Norman's been drinking lately. His tongue was loose on those occasions. He said so himself. There was a surgeon who worked at that hospital who agreed to help our grief for money," Melissa continued. "Kevin?" "No. Another partner of his who was supposed to fill in for Kevin in surgery." "And how did they pull off this switch?" "Oh, Norman hired someone to get Kevin's car torched. Because of that, he couldn't get to work on time." "But why?" "Because you knew your wife was due to give birth soon, and you were just expecting twins. Not the surgeon switched the live twin for our dead boy. And told you that one baby didn't survive." Melissa found the last sentence particularly difficult. Andrew literally gasped at the cynicism of the situation. Who do you have to be to agree to participate in something like that? Do people have nothing sacred in them at all? Or are they willing to sell everything for money? He said bitterly. "That's the story," said the widow, quite sullenly. "Frankly, I hoped it was all drunken talk. But here you have appeared on my doorstep, and now nothing will ever be the same again. Norman is dead. Nicholas has become my only joy in life. Please, I understand, but don't take him away from me." Tears came to the woman's eyes. She pressed her napkin to her mouth, trying to suppress her sobs. Andrew didn't know what to say to her. On the one hand, a heinous crime could not go unpunished. On the other hand, he understood what it was to be left alone, and he did not want this poor, broken woman to suffer such a fate. Melissa liked Andrew in a strange way, sympathizing with him either because of the similarity of their situation or something much deeper. "Mum, why are you crying?" The toddler suddenly ran into the room. He looked sternly at Andrew sitting in the chair, bravely shading his mother. "Did you hurt her?" "No," the guest muttered confusedly, looking at the child. He looked just like Michael. Maybe he held himself a little differently and dressed differently. Otherwise, he was an exact copy of his son. So close to him, yet so alien. The readiness with which the little boy rushed to defend the only person close to him said a lot about their relationship. "It's okay, son. We're just talking." "Our guest's name is Andrew," Melissa said, trying to calm herself down. She sat the child on her lap, cradling him against her. "Melissa, I'm sorry." A frightened Veronica ran into the room without looking. "Oh, hello." The girl's gaze fell on her guest, and she was immediately embarrassed. Stepping from foot to foot, the nanny took the child and immediately retreated to another room. "What was that look she gave you?" Melissa asked quietly. And don't scold her, but Veronica told me something about you. We met in the park where she and Nicholas are walking. That's how I found you. And what happens now? The widow asked, looking her guest resolutely in the face. I guess I'll go home now. You two have a lot to think about to rest. It's been a difficult day. And then I suggest we meet during the week, introduce the boys, and decide how we're going to live our lives. Okay. With that, they parted. Andrew said goodbye to Melissa, winked at an embarrassed Veronica, and headed home. The journey flew by unnoticed. Too many thoughts were swirling in his head. Everything that had happened seemed unreal, something that belonged on TV or in a dream, but certainly not in real life. Show up. Annie snapped Andrew out of his musings as soon as he appeared on the doorstep. How much longer do we have to put up with this bum in our house? How many times do I have to tell you? Kevin is not a bum. I see. Do you want to set up a shelter for the poor? Do you have to be so mean? Andrew answered question after question. Oh, you. Shame on you for talking to your wife like that, Annie exclaimed indignantly. Can you at least shout a little quieter? I've had a hard day. I want to get some rest. Well, here we go. Spouse, seeing that he wasn't paying any attention to her display. But you want to drag whoever you want into the house, please. Only I won't be here. It's either me or this tramp. You can pack your bags. Tired, Andrew replied as he walked past. Arguing was the last thing he wanted to do right now. Annie continued to shout something back at him, but realizing that hysteria was useless, she rushed to pack, throwing her clothes into her bag. She slammed the door defiantly loudly, tossing her keys straight onto the corridor floor as a farewell. Not too harsh? Kevin asked, quietly rustling the tires. Tired, Andrew retorted, sitting down at the table and rubbing his face heavily with his hands. Drink? He asked when the former surgeon stopped in front of him. No need, Kevin replied, shaking his head negatively. Vodka hasn't helped anyone yet. Better have some soup. I've made some, because there's nothing but delicacies in the fridge. You can't find any real food. So, Andrew, do you take Melissa to be your wife? Said the registrar at the registry office. Yes, he answered confidently. Do you, Melissa, agree to marry Andrew? Of course, the woman smiled happily. Exchange rings, and you may kiss. Solemn music played, and the guests clapped. The sounds of champagne being opened were heard. Congratulations. I still can't believe it worked out this way. Thank you, Kevin said as he shook the groom's hand. The former surgeon stood among the others, leaning lightly on his cane. In gratitude for the open truth, Andrew had not only taken Kevin in, but also paid for his treatment. Now he could manage without a wheelchair. He couldn't walk fast, but he could walk on his own 2 feet. The former vagrant was completely transformed. He started shaving again, regained his human appearance, and even found a decent job. About a full-fledged surgical practice, of course, was out of the question. But the man was easily accepted as a teacher at the medical college, where he could share his rich experience with the younger generation. And if it weren't for you and Kevin, none of this would have happened, the man replied to the handshake. Andrew happily embraced his bride. He thanked fate for such a gift. They had been divorced from Annie almost as soon as she had left home. Their relationship should have ended long ago, but the entrepreneur was still lacking the determination to make the first step. It was a good thing she'd made the effort herself. Now everything will be great. The kids are happy, and that's the most important thing, Melissa replied, looking at the twins playing. The sympathy that had been born in Andrew's mind the first time he had met this amazing woman had been mutual. They had met to introduce the boys, and then, before they knew it, they were spending more and more time together. Soon the friendly relationship grew into a romantic one, and then the couple decided to get married, never to part again. Yeah, now you're bringing it up, Kevin smiled. By the way, just wondering how that story with your shop manager ended. What story? Melissa interjected curiously. She didn't know all the details of her husband's business yet, but she was very keenly interested in his life. After all, they had everything in common now, both sorrows and joys. Yes, There was a trickster on my staff. Can you imagine? Came up with a scheme to fill his own pocket at the expense of the shop. And he was poisoning the population with expired products. Thank God, at least there were no serious consequences, Andrew replied. Eventually I got him out and fired him. And he left without a scandal? Kevin wondered. You don't just give up that kind of favor. Where's he going to go? You can't go against the evidence. I set up a hidden camera in his office and got him talking. It was practically a confession. What an intrigue you have. Maybe I should go undercover with you too so I can track down crooks, Melissa wondered. Oh, we don't have any schemers left. I've cleaned up the staff properly. Now everything is running smoothly and bringing in a good income. Hey, what's with the newlyweds being idle? Bitter, was Mr. Albert's pleased exclamation from the guests. Indeed, you've been completely neglected. Bitter. Kevin joined in the exclamation. The newlyweds laughed happily and then started kissing to the delight of their invited friends. Now they did not worry about the future, because everyone realized that they would never be lonely, no matter what trials life presented them with. Andrew looked around the apartment. The previous tenants had done a good job. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere. The room smelled of tobacco smoke. It was impossible to breathe. It didn't bother Andrew much, though. Any apartment could be resuscitated. If only there was the will. Andrew was also of the opinion that everything could be sold, even air. You just had to know how to do it. Have you already invited the cleaners? He asked his colleague, who was standing next to him and looking at all this horror. Yes, they are on their way. And these Pinchuk you have already taken. A long time ago. Now it's just a matter of time. Andrew's been handling this kind of dirty money for over 8 years. He had a college degree. And now he's a realtor. In our country, people with such a profession get pennies in the beginning, and after that too. Andrew did not want to earn half his life pennies, so he joined the so-called gang of realtors. They worked like regular realtors, but they had one thing in common. It was often illegal. However, quite easily Andrew found alcoholics or people who were no longer able to somehow take care of their non-privatized apartment, drank them, and took them out in the open field, and then bribed notaries and registered their colleagues and dubious friends in these apartments. The scheme worked perfectly. Yes, the activity was dangerous and illegal, but it brought good money. After registration, these people privatized and sold these apartments, and then fairly divided the earnings. Everything worked like a Swiss watch. Still, I'm glad I found you, the leader said. When did we decide to celebrate another successful deal? That kind of determination and charisma is to be envied. Yes, there are better guys than you, but you have a lot of potential, and you'll go far in the future. I know that. Andrew learned every day from his seniors. Which tenants are best to avoid? Which ones won't cause problems? Who to sell these apartments to later? How to bribe notaries? All these questions had quite sane answers. Soon Andrew himself began to give lessons to less experienced comrades. One day Jan asked, sitting next to Andrew, "What if the police? What will the police do to you?" Andrew answered the question with a question. "I'm a real swindler. It's a criminal case. Fraud." "So Ian, you seem like a smart guy, but if you're smart, the police won't get to you." "That's not an explanation. You don't need an explanation. Don't be a rat, and everything will be fine." Soon Andrew was out of the business. No, his scams weren't over. He just moved on to a new niche. In those 8 years, he'd made a lot of money, but that wasn't enough for him. He didn't want to stop there. After all, if the system of life could be broken, he could continue to play cat and mouse. No one ever suspected him of these frauds. The people who made deals with him were happy with their new apartment. And these homeless people, whom Andrew's friends took somewhere in the countryside or in the fields, somehow lived out their lives there. However, Andrew didn't care about them. The only thing he cared about in life was money. And fortunately for him, he knew how easy it was to get it, without hunching over in a stuffy office, spoiling his posture and killing his health. One day a great idea popped into his head. Andrew immediately began to realize it. "So you want to offer me such a sum of money for this case?" asked the head of the company. "Let's be honest, you're not going to keep building one way or the other. I am well aware of your current financial situation. Eventually, your money will run out and the company will go bankrupt. And I'm offering you a win-win," Andrew reasoned with a smirk. He knew that sooner or later this man would agree to the deal. "What makes you think we're on the verge of bankruptcy? The company is growing nicely. I have connections and smart people whispered in my ear about your situation. It's just a matter of time. And soon you'll be out of everything," Andrew continued. "You know that very well. I'm offering to save your hides and possibly your families." "Do you think that's legal?" the manager asked incredulously. "How can it be legal? Don't be ridiculous." "Of course it isn't. But I'm sure you won't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You have a family, don't you?" "Yes," he nodded. "And how will I provide for it when the company is in debt and loans?" "That's none of your business," the manager said. "I'm just guessing," Andrew shrugged. "You know, there are plenty of companies like yours out there, and smart people wouldn't turn down an offer like that. I'll give you an hour to think about it." Andrew left the office, knowing that he would be called back in an hour. So he waited. In fact, it happened even faster than he'd anticipated. He was called back in 15 minutes. Andrew, very satisfied, went into the office and sat down again on that cozy white chair. "Good," said the manager. "But why do you need it? Do you have nowhere to put your money?" "That's none of your concern," Andrew replied. "The deal is good for you. That's all you have to worry about." The manager hesitated for a moment, but then gave up and said firmly and confidently, "I agree to the deal." "Good," Andrew rejoiced. "Then we will sign the necessary documents and you are free to go." Andrew had been hatching this plan in his head for a long time, and now he began to act. He bought the so-called apartments at a terribly cheap price. And the construction company didn't mind. They were really on the verge of bankruptcy, which Andrew saved them from, you could say. These non-existent apartments he planned to now put on sale, and competently organizing an advertising campaign to earn a fairly large amount of money. Having signed all the documents with the developer, Andrew paid the agreed amount of money and was left with these apartments, which did not even have walls yet. It was time to take action. A man of about 50 years old walked into the office. A couple of gray hairs could already be seen on his head. Andrew invited the guest to sit down and asked the secretary to pour him some coffee. "Good afternoon. Are you here about the apartment?" Andrew asked. "Yes, of course. Why else?" replied the man. "I was just looking for a suitable apartment to move into and came across your website." "Great. I hope you are aware that these apartments will only be ready in a year or two. New construction. You know what I mean?" "Yes, of course. The scheme makes perfect sense to me." "It's not for nothing that they call it distant," nodded the client. "You know, many acquaintances say that you should be very careful when choosing a developer, after all such money. But I've read various reviews of your company, and I'm happy with everything." Andrew wanted to jump with happiness. Of course, all these reviews were written by bots or people who didn't care what to write reviews on. All that mattered was money. Andrew had it all figured out down to the smallest detail. "Yes, I agree with you, the developer must be reliable," he nodded. "But don't worry, everything will be documented and notarized. Let me show you our plans." Andrew unfolded a brochure with apartments and the future look of the house in front of the man. The client immediately fell for the colorful design and paid the full amount. After an hour of conversation, then half an hour with the notary, and all the fake documents were drawn up, and the first money was received. Andrew was beyond happy. His brilliant plan was working. He had never thought before that there could be such simpletons in the world as this man. Meanwhile, the line to the office for the bargain was already forming. In one day, Andrew was able to get more than 20 million. Of course, all this did not count against the company, whose employees were Andrew's friends. Everyone played their part. There was no reason to be suspicious, and there was no reason to be suspicious. "Mom, I'm home," Elsa announced loudly as she stood on the mat in the hallway. She took off her shoes and heard her mother's shuffling footsteps on the floor. "Honey, why are you home so early?" Adelaide wondered. Yes, my class was canceled. They said there was no point in having a history lesson now that no one was taking the exam. It's better to study at home for the important subjects. Oh, I didn't even have time to make soup. I somehow slept until 10 today, but I can afford a day off. Elsa smiled. Oh, Mom, you have no idea how some people dream of a day off in the middle of the week. They envy you. But your mother works on Sunday, while normal people lie in bed. That's right, Elsa grinned. I'll go while I do my homework. Call me when something's ready. An hour later, Adelaide called her daughter for lunch. The soup is amazing, Mom. Elsa marveled. I still don't understand why Dad left you. You see, these men don't know anything about true happiness, joked Adelaide. Elsa finished her soup, drinking bread, and continued. Listen, Mom, you know that in a month my birthday is coming up, 18 years old after all. Do you mind if I invite my friends over? Oh yes, of course I don't mind, my mother smiled. I could even go. No, don't go. My friends love you very much. Stay and have fun with us. Is my cooking good? I'll be the only one cooking that day. Are you sure? Why don't you go to the country house or Kira's? Mom, I'm sure I convinced my daughter. I love you madly and I want you to spend this important day with me. You should know what I'll give you, intrigued the mother. All the girls will die of envy. New cosmetics, dresses, perfume? Elsa began to guess. No, better. I'm sure you'll appreciate my gift. Adelaide had been sitting outside the office with the wooden door for half an hour. She had not been summoned. Finally, they let her in. Good afternoon, my name is Andrew. He smiled. I'm Adela, and I'm sure you're the only one who can help me make the best gift for my daughter. I'm all ears. Adela made herself comfortable in the chair and began. I would like to buy a one-bedroom apartment somewhere on the 15th floor. The main thing is to have a view of the sunset from the windows. Do you have one? Sure, Andrew replied confidently. So you're ready to sign? Don't you want to hear the price? Adela was embarrassed and shook her head. You see, I wanted to show you something more valuable than money. Andrew was intrigued. He approached Adela, who was pulling something out of her purse. She pulled out a small wooden box and showed it to Andrew. What's in it? The man asked. Adela smiled and opened the box. Andrew's eyes sparkled. He was looking at a blue stone, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow, decorated with gold and small diamonds. It's a blue garnet, very rare in nature, Adela explained. This pendant is a family heirloom. I was going to pawn it, but I thought I'd show it to you first. Andrew's eyes sparkled. He tried to take the box, but Adela closed the lid, almost pinching his fingers. He pulled his hand away and looked at the woman with a smile. I don't think you need to go to a pawn shop. We're willing to take this pendant as payment. Adela was very surprised, but not confused. Are you sure? Is it legal? Of course it's legal. The notary is here for a reason. Kieran. Andrew nodded towards the lawyer sitting with a folder. Adela glanced at Kieran. He looked very young. Is that your lawyer? She questioned. Yes, Andrew smiled. He looks like a schoolboy, but he works very well. Shall we do it? Adela bit her lip, as she always did when she was nervous. She had a difficult and important decision to make. Andrew, meanwhile, handed her the necessary documents. I can give you some time to familiarize yourself. Is there anyone you need to consult? No, I'm just going to go through the paperwork and... hold on. Can we see the apartment first? Adela, I thought I mentioned it wasn't there yet. You mean it's not ready yet? It'll be finished in 2 years, but we're already having a big buyout. I understand. But the foundation's already there, the walls. Why don't we go over there? And then I'd be happy to sign the paperwork. Andrew, of course, didn't like the idea, because he didn't want her to suspect anything. But Adela didn't seem like a very bright woman. She wasn't even embarrassed by the fact that he was willing to accept payment in jewelry. I don't think that would make sense. What's bothering you? I don't know. Would you like to be sure or something? Andrew smiled. He stood up and pointed the woman in the direction of the window. The windows overlooked a building under construction. There was really only the foundation and a small part of the walls. Construction had just begun. I can show you how we plan to do it, Andrew offered. Adela scrutinized the building from the window. Andrew did not understand the meaning of her actions, because the building had not yet taken on a presentable appearance. He handed her various booklets with pictures of apartments, courtyards, and playgrounds. Andrew wouldn't mind living in such a high rise, but he realized that all these pictures would remain pictures. Yes, Adela answered confidently. In a few minutes, they signed the necessary documents and Adela paid for the apartment with her expensive pendant with a rare stone. I hope my daughter will be happy in it, she said as she signed the contract. Thank you. Andrew felt uncomfortable. Yes, he'd spent his life cheating, but this situation suddenly stabbed him right in the heart. The woman seemed nice, and he didn't wish her any harm personally. But it wasn't his fault that everything in the world was based on money. I can't take it anymore, admitted the lawyer with glasses, after Adela had left. You can't what? Andrew questioned him seriously. Deceive people. You're the ones keeping me here out of my own free will. The last sentence infuriated Andrew. He stood up and said, Not of your own free will? Who else is going to pay $200,000 a month to a lowlife like you? Nobody wants you. Nobody. And I gave you a chance to earn your own money. I'm sick of it. Are you going to be millionaires at this rate? This is a criminal case. A criminal case. Kieran stood up, collected the documents in his folder, and headed for the exit. And where will you go? Andrew asked him in a nervous but stern voice. He never allowed himself to show weakness in front of his colleagues and subordinates. They must not think that they had won or could somehow hurt the boss. Anywhere. And I'd rather work for pennies than for you, Kieran said his last words and left the office. Andrew stood in a daze for a long time, and then sat down in his chair. He realized that this was the end of it. It would be impossible to find another person with a notary license to forge documents in such a short time. The matter was further complicated by the fact that Kieran could turn Andrew in to the police at any moment. Laurel, please bring the statement of our income. I need to know the final amount, Andrew called the secretary. A few minutes later, a huge folder lay on Andrew's desk. The amount earned pleased him. He realized that he could close the business. No one noticed how he withdrew all the money from the company account and transferred it to his card. In a few more minutes, he was already walking down the office, meeting the surprised faces of his colleagues. Andrew, where are you going? A coworker asked him. I have to show a client a house. Andrew tried to get out of it. A house. But we agreed that we don't show anyone the house. Didn't you explain it to her? I did, but she wanted to be sure. I'll just show her the building and she won't suspect a thing, Matthew said. But Andrew's coworker seemed to suspect something. Matthew looked around incredulously at Andrew and his belongings. All right, he replied uncertainly. Go. An hour later, Andrew was already sitting in the airplane and preparing to leave the country. Matthew, yelled one of the employees, running up to his friend. What's wrong? Why are you yelling like that? Andrew ran off and stole all the money. We don't have a dime left in our account. The doorbell rang almost every minute. Elsa welcomed guests who brought her many gifts and flowers. Her best friend Nabu and friend Emily came, along with 5 other friends and classmates. Elsa escorted each one into the living room and sat them down on the couch. Her mother continued to prepare the cake, which she planned to finish making in an hour. Are you sure we need such a big cake? Elsa laughed. We'll have to eat it for 3 more days. Mom, it's not a wedding. You're turning 18, you're an adult now. This event is even more important than a wedding, so don't you dare stop me. The woman didn't give up. Elsa smiled and left to her friends. While the dishes were cooking, they decided to play board games. My mom gave me earrings for my coming-of-age, Emily complained. I hope your mother will be more creative. Even if my mom gives me a candy bar, I'll be happy. After all, the main thing is that I have her, confidently answered Elsa. I agree, supported her Nabu. Parents are only a part of our lives. We should appreciate every moment with them. After all, one day they will be gone, and all of us will regret that we did not tell them how much we love them, that we complained about the gifts. And then we'll miss that attention, their support. Well, you know, Emily continued resentfully, my brother got a car for his birthday, a car. Damn it. You can always buy your own car. But you won't always be with your parents, Nabu said. You'll regret hugging them later, but it'll be too late. Okay, guys, Elsa interrupted them. It's actually my birthday today, not a wake. So stop talking about death and who's going to be sorry for who. Yeah, sorry, Nabu said, embarrassed. Guys, the table is set, waiting for you to sit down. Came from the kitchen. Everyone immediately rushed to the table in the kitchen. Some of them had not eaten all day to taste the delicious dishes that Elsa's mother cooked. She was a master at it. Thank you, Elsa thanked her friend again. I'm glad you have the same opinion as I do. Now let's go celebrate my day and have fun. Everyone sat down at the table. Some had already pulled off the sausage, others were eating Caesar salad. Adelaide tapped her glass lightly with her knife to get everyone's attention. She stood up and, raising her glass, began. I am so glad that we are all gathered together today to celebrate the birthday of the person most dear to us, my daughter. Adelaide met Elsa's gaze and didn't want to break that eye contact, for it was her she was addressing. My little girl turns 18 today. This number means a lot to every person, because he or she is entering adulthood, full of adventures and problems. Of course, everyone laughed at these harmless but correct jokes. I know that my Elsa is very determined, Adelaide continued. She achieves everything, and always. Nothing can ever get in her way. She can cope with all of life's problems. Let's drink to that. But not everyone here is 18. Can I have a soft drink? Nabu said jokingly. Everyone laughed and then clinked glasses. Half an hour into the meal, Adelaide disappeared, and then appeared with a white folder in her hands, which was tied with a pink bow. All the guests were very much surprised at this spectacle. Elsa was especially surprised. She got up from her chair and went up to her mother. Dear Elsa, Adelaide began, I want to thank you once again for having you. You have helped me all these years. These documents contain your gift. Elsa took the folder and started to open it. She pulled out her keys from there and a file with the papers neatly laid out in it. After reading a few lines, Elsa realized everything. Mommy, Elsa exclaimed with joy, throwing herself into her mother's arms. God, Mom. What's there? What's there? Asked friends, snatching the folder from each other. This is the apartment, joyfully shouted Elsa. An apartment. Now you can gather there with your friends even every day. Laugh, Adelaide smiled. Adelaide, without your approval there is no point in gathering, Nabu praised her. Mom cried with happiness. Elsa, thank you. Thank you, you deserve it. Adelaide replied tenderly. The next morning was the happiest morning of Elsa's life. She got up early, put on some music, brewed coffee, and made delicious cheesecakes. Mom was still gone, but Elsa realized that she was very tired. Yesterday they had cleared the table until 2 in the morning and washed the dishes afterward. An hour or two passed. Mom still did not come into the kitchen. Then Elsa decided to surprise her. She put a couple of cheesecakes in a plate, poured her mother's favorite syrup over them, poured coffee, and with a tray in her hands went to her mother's room to arrange her breakfast in bed. However, when Elsa opened the door to her mother's bedroom, the tray nearly fell from her hands. Her mother was sitting on the bed with a lost face, watching television with tears in her eyes. Elsa immediately put the breakfast tray on the table and ran up to her mother. Mom, what's wrong with you? Are you what? Elsa looked at the television screen. The news was talking about some people being detained, but it wasn't clear yet how it concerned her mother. Adelaide was silent and paid no attention to her daughter. She called out to her and tried to get her mother to look at her, Mother Elsa shouted nervously once more. Only after this cry did Adelaide look at her daughter. Her mother's face was swollen, her eyes red from crying. Her hands were trembling. "Mommy, what happened? What did you see? Did something happen in the city? Did someone die? Mommy, answer me." "I'm so stupid," Adelaide replied in a shaky voice as she continued to cry. Now the tears were rolling down onto her daughter's pajamas. "Mommy, can you explain to me what happened?" "No, first, give me a sedative." Elsa jumped out of bed and ran to find a sedative in the medicine cabinet. She found it quickly enough and soon returned to her mother. When she drank the pills with water and calmed down a little, she sighed and began her heartbreaking story. "They tricked me, my daughter." "Oh, cheated. Aren't they ashamed?" "Somebody tricked you? I wanted to make you happy. And those devils knew everything, but they didn't stop me. Egotists, thieves, scum." "Mom, be more specific. I don't understand anything." "Didn't I buy you an apartment?" "Yes, you did. Why? What's wrong with it?" "Look at the news." Elsa looked at her mother in disbelief and then turned on the TV. The news said that members of a gang of swindlers had been arrested. They deceived people by selling them non-existent apartments. The circumstances are being investigated. "Mom, what does it mean?" Elsa asked excitedly. "I bought an apartment from this real estate development company. They offered such beautiful views from the window, and I didn't even suspect a thing. How stupid of me." "Who sold you the apartment?" Elsa stood up abruptly. "We'll go to the police right now. Right now." "Who's going to help us? They don't know all the details yet. We'll file a complaint. We should get our money back. I'm sure I'm not the only one who fell for this scam. Come on, let's go to the police." Elsa started to collect her mother. She gathered all the necessary documents, took the damn folder with the apartment contract and took her mother out. They got in the car and drove to the nearest police station. "Is this your signature?" the investigator asked Adelaide, pointing to the document. "Yes, it is," Adelaide sobbed. "But I didn't think they had anything." "It's just an ordinary company," said the investigator. "It says here that you didn't pay with money, but with a valuable pendant. Didn't that make you uncomfortable?" A little Adelaide answered through her tears. "But afterwards I thought it was a way of paying. What difference does it make whether I take it to a pawnbroker or pay for it immediately?" "Adelaide, in this country we only pay with money. Where did you get the information that you could pay for an apartment with a pendant?" "I don't know," Adelaide continued to sob. The investigator handed her a glass of water. "Go outside, get some air. Then come back and we'll find out, I promise." The guard kindly opened the door for Adelaide. Her daughter met her in the corridor. "What's going on there? How is it?" Elsa asked her questions. "It's not good, my dear. I'm the fool. A normal person would not give the pendant, which was passed down from generation to generation, to a crook. No one will compensate me for anything. It's all my fault. I'm sorry, Laurel. I robbed you of your apartment and the family jewel." "Mom, what are you talking about?" I tried to cheer her daughter up. "You're not the only victim of these things. They'll find them. They'll get what they deserve. You'll be compensated." They sat down in the waiting room and waited for something. After half an hour, one of the employees came up to them and told them they'd better go home. "But how can they go home?" Adelaide was indignant. The investigator said we would continue the conversation. "He has already made certain conclusions. We'll call you when we know a little more. We will do everything we can to make sure you are compensated for the damage, but they will not return the family jewel," the mother cried, leaning on her daughter's shoulder. The police officer said nothing more and left, leaving the poor family to relive the grief. The following days were very disturbing. Adelaide would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming from nightmares, drinking sedatives. After a week of this torment, the results of stress and sleepless nights were already visible. Elsa also had a hard time. Not only did she have to study for exams every day, but she also had to do housework. Adelaide couldn't even get out of bed, and there was no one to cook dinner. Someone has to scrub the floors so that the apartment doesn't get dusty and dirty. And waking up woke Elsa Nabu. The bell rang a long time ago, he said. Elsa raised her head and looked sleepily at her friend. You slept through a whole lesson. Stella gave you a 2 and is calling your parents to school, Nabu informed her. Elsa began to slowly throw her notebooks into her briefcase, muttering under her breath. Let her call. No one's coming anyway. Elsa, how much did you sleep today? Nabu asked. 2 hours, Elsa whispered. So it's Friday. How much sleep have you gotten this week? 15 hours, tops, Elsa whispered. What do you care? Elsa threw her backpack on and headed towards another office. What do you mean? What do I care? Nabu resented. I'm your best friend, and in the future, maybe your fiancé. I don't care about your silly jokes, Nabu, Elsa replied with disgust. I have enough problems without you. Nabu realized that her friend was completely unwilling to make contact, so he simply blocked her way forward. Get away. Elsa shouted. I'm not moving away until you explain what's going on. Get back, you idiot. I'll call the teacher. I may be an idiot, but I'm not going to step away. Come on, tell me everything. Elsa stopped, pushed with her foot, and exhaled. All right, I'll tell you. They walked over to the window. Elsa put her things on the windowsill and only then began. Do you remember what I got for my birthday? How could I forget such a thing, an apartment? Well, this apartment is not an apartment at all. Mom bought it from scammers. They just collected money from people for apartments that aren't built yet, and then they just ran away. Well, not exactly. Turns out there was a ringleader that my mom made the deal with. His name was Andrew. He had his own crew. But Andrew betrayed his own. He collected all the stolen money and left for parts unknown. And his colleagues decided to take revenge on him, to expose all their dark deed. But they should be held accountable. There should be compensation. The authorities promised they'd look into it, but I don't trust them. It's complicated by the fact that my mother paid with family jewelry. There was no money, so there's nothing to pay back. It's a nightmare. My mom is under so much stress. She doesn't drink, doesn't eat, doesn't sleep well, has stopped cooking or doing anything around the house. She was fired from her job because of her numerous absences. She is developing a real depression, and I don't know how to help her. Maybe she should talk to a specialist, a psychologist, for example. He might be able to solve the problem. After all, I persuaded her to come to at least one appointment. Just to talk, she flatly refuses. She doesn't want to, that's all. And that doesn't make me feel any better either. The housework she used to do, I do now. And when I finish my homework, I only have 2 hours to sleep. Nabu put his arm around Elsa and then said, Elsa, I'm your friend, and I'm willing to help you. This weekend I'll persuade my mom to go to a psychologist, and I'll help you with your homework. Please don't refuse my help. I understand how hard this is for you, and I want to help you. Okay, Nabu, Elsa replied. When Elsa got home, the first thing she did was go to her mother. She looked haggard and exhausted. Her bruises under her eyes were getting bigger every day. She hadn't bathed in days. Her hair was disheveled. She resembled a homeless person who had lost everything. And all these days she watched TV nonstop. Mom, Elsa whispered, entering Adelaide's bedroom. Can you talk to me? Her mother didn't answer. She was like a zombie. Before, Elsa would just walk away after such disregard for her existence. But this time she couldn't take it anymore. Mother, Elsa screamed, Mother. Adelaide didn't turn her head. It was as if she had lost her hearing. Elsa sobbed amidst only the annoying voices of reporters and journalists from the television. Elsa was almost losing her mind, and at one point she made up her mind. She went to the nightstand, grabbed a desk lamp, and threw it at the TV with all her might. The TV fell to the floor with a crash. Only then did Adelaide look at her daughter. She didn't say anything, just stared at her with her absent, lifeless gaze. It was as if she had become an emotionless vegetable who neither sees nor hears anything. Nothing bothers her, she just exists out of inertia. Elsa started shaking her mother to bring her to her senses. Mom, Come back to me. Wake up, wake up. I'm here, your daughter, Mom. It's nighttime. Should I go to bed? Adelaide asked calmly. Elsa wiped away her tears and looked at her mother in shock. Had this person completely lost her mind? Had she already forgotten that she had a daughter? Mom, do you remember who I am? She asked pitifully. Laurel, what kind of stupid questions are these? Smiled Mom, wiping the tears that flowed down her daughter's cheeks. Elsa cried even more. Her mother remembered how long it had been since she had seen her smile. Mom, let's you and I go to the doctor, Elsa suggested. He'll help you. Honey, let's talk tomorrow. I'm very sleepy. Sure, Mom. Elsa put her mother to bed and herself began to clean up the consequences of her stress. That TV had cost a lot of money, which they were having trouble with. Elsa wanted to punish herself for such a breakdown. In the morning, Elsa opened Nabu's door. What are you doing up so early? She asked. We're still sleeping. But we didn't agree on a specific time, so I thought I should come early. Am I right? No, Elsa answered softly. I haven't even woken Mom up yet, but I can leave. Elsa rolled her eyes, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him into the house. Go to my room. I don't want my mother to see outsiders, especially in this state. Elsa pointed him to the right door and went to wake her mother herself. Mom, she said softly, Mom, it's time to get up. We have plans today. Booed Mom. Elsa remembered her mother waking her up in first grade. For many people, this early rising was stressful, but for Elsa it was an opportunity to hear the kindest words and eat the most delicious cheesecakes or pancakes. Adelaide woke up again in a terrible state. Elsa had already stopped paying attention to it. She dressed her mother, fed her, and led her to the exit. I'll get the keys now and come back, Elsa warned her mother. However, Elsa cleaned up a bit. She ran to her room where Nabu was. If you haven't had breakfast, there are a couple pancakes in the fridge, she turned to her friend. Wait for me here. I'll be back in an hour. With or without Mom, I don't know yet. Will do. Captain Nabu tried unsuccessfully to defuse the situation. They sat in the psychological center for an hour. They were invited to an appointment. Good afternoon. We are here, and you. Elsa introduced herself and sat her mother on a comfortable soft chair. Good afternoon. Yes, just one remark. I will need to talk to your mother personally. The psychologist addressed Elsa personally. But I should explain the situation, right? That won't be necessary. I'll find out everything myself. Don't worry, your mom will be fine. Elsa thanked the psychologist and left the office. In the waiting room, she was offered coffee, but Elsa refused, so there was too much anxiety in her life. What's up? Nabu wrote to her. While waiting for Mom. No news, Elsa typed to him. Everything will be fine, he replied. Half an hour later, a psychologist came out to see Elsa. The specialist was excited. Well, what is it? Elsa asked in a trembling voice, jumping up from her chair. Your mother's condition is extremely serious. She has a prolonged depression. Her brain is so unwilling to accept reality that it blocks out many memories and external stimuli. She can often talk like a 5-year-old, so she's trying to protect herself from everyone and everything. Yes, she watches TV all the time, often does not pay attention to me, even when I call her. After consulting with a psychologist, it became clear that Adelaide's condition is very severe and requires serious treatment. The psychologist recommended going to a psychiatric clinic where Adelaide could receive the necessary help and take care of her mental and physical health. Elsa took this with apprehension, as she had stereotypical ideas about mental hospitals. However, the psychologist reassured her that it was a good modern clinic. In addition, the psychologist advised her to be examined in a regular hospital, as Adelaide's condition was worrisome on physical grounds as well. Elsa followed the advice and went with her mother to the city hospital. Where are we going, my daughter? Adelaide asked. We are going to the hospital, Mom. Elsa smiled, trying to hide her despair. After the examination, the attending doctor informed Elsa of the disappointing diagnosis. Adelaide had a brain tumor at the third, almost final stage. This explained her memory loss, strange behavior, as well as her thinness and emaciation. The doctor recommended keeping Adelaide in the hospital for further evaluation and treatment, although the chances were slim. Of course, Elsa replied, her hands shaking as she tried to open the front door lock. Hearing the sounds, Nabu hurriedly opened the door to the returning Elsa. "Where's your mom?" was the first thing he was worried about when he saw Elsa alone. "At the hospital," Elsa replied in a trembling voice. Elsa answered Nabu tiredly and monotonously. "I gave her to the hospital." "Are you all right?" Nabu gently inquired. "It'll do, of course, I've been better, but at least my mom is getting help now and I should be happy about that," Elsa replied. They walked into the kitchen. Elsa put the kettle on and sat down at the table, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," Nabu tried to support her. "Remember when you said not to mess around in your apartment?" Elsa looked at him tiredly. "Did you break something?" "Nothing. I just took the TV to the repair shop." "Did your mom break it?" "No, it was me." "Why?" "My mom was really sick last night. She was completely out of touch with reality because she was chained to that TV the whole time. I had no choice but to do what had to be done." "How much did they charge for the repairs?" "Not much. I have an uncle who works there. I explained the situation, and he'll do it for free." "Thank you. But you shouldn't have." "Why not? I just wanted to help." "I understand, but I'm the kind of person who hates to accept help. It's easier for me to do it myself." "You've taken on an impossible burden." "Elsa, let me help you, if not morally, then financially. Jesus, and in 3 months, exams, graduation. Please concentrate on your studies. I know it's hard, but I'll help you as much as I can." "Thank you, you're the best friend I've ever had." From that day on, things started to get better. Elsa stopped skipping classes and started getting enough sleep. But the only thing that remained in her life was her mother. Every few days she came to the hospital to check on her condition. The doctors did not give a good prognosis. Despite all efforts, the woman was getting worse. Once, immersed in nostalgia, Elsa rummaged through old boxes and found many photo albums. The photos were all old, some of them barely recognizable. Elsa decided that Adelaide owed it to Adelaide to see this album, so the next day she hurried to her mother's hospital room. "Mom," "Hi," Elsa said hello and entered embarrassed. Adelaide was lying on the couch reading a book. "Hi," she replied casually. Adelaide looked happy, but Elsa knew the reason and it upset her. The doctor gave her mother special pills, which of course are bad for the nervous system. But the person really looks healthy and alive, but only looks. "And here I am reading," Adelaide smiled. "The doctor said it improves memory and cognitive functions of the brain." Elsa smiled sincerely, sat down next to her mother's couch, and took some albums out of her backpack. "I'm here to refresh your memory too." They began to look at the album. But suddenly Adelaide snatched it up, flipped to the end, and ran her fingers over some of the photos as if they were soaked in memories. "I haven't shown you these pictures before," she said. "I don't know. I was afraid or something. Did you know that our family comes from a line of very rich aristocrats?" "No," Elsa replied. "Well, they died during the revolution, but not all of them. Survived the children, your great-grandfathers. Not even ashes of that manner are left. But your great-grandfather managed to hide something very valuable today. His mother had a pendant, a wedding present from the groom gold with a rare blue stone inside. You know, it reminds me of that necklace from the movie Titanic, Heart of the Ocean." Elsa was amazed that her mother remembered everything in great detail. But it's not surprising Titanic was Adelaide's favorite movie. "This pendant is in a drawer, in a wooden box. It's so precious to me, you have no idea." Only at that moment did Elsa realize which pendant she was talking about. The pendant that was the rent, or rather the heir. Adelaide cautiously hinted. "Elsa, are you sure it's at home?" "Of course, I've never worn it." Elsa, we haven't got that pendant. Adelaide exclaimed after a moment's silence, remembering what had happened and why the pendant had disappeared. You could tell from her rounded eyes that she had remembered. Yes, she said sadly. Mom, Elsa cried, unable to contain her emotions at the sight of her mother melting in front of her eyes. Mom, I love you so much. I love you too, my daughter, Adelaide smiled. I am so happy that I had you. Elsa came out of the room with her mascara running and met the doctor talking to the girl at the reception desk. My mother, how is her condition? She inquired, wiping her moist eyes. The doctor looked at her with a serious look, and then suggested that she go to a less crowded place's office. We're doing everything we can, but the disease is progressing, the doctor informed her. But how is that possible? Elsa tried to find out. She was fine until a month ago, and now her condition is getting worse. What's the cause? We can't say for sure. It could be a genetic condition that developed under stress. Your mother needs support and care now more than ever. Will this help? It'll help her morally. But I don't want you to get your hopes up. The prognosis is bleak. We're doing everything we can, but a good outcome is unlikely. You have to be prepared for that. Elsa nodded. I'm terribly sorry, the doctor added. Your doctors, do something, I beg you. My mom is still young. She has to live. I promise you, we will do everything possible from our side. And from your side, we are waiting for support and moral help. I heard you. Days passed. It seemed that there were not 24 hours in a day, but only 2 miserable hours, which Elsa spent on trips to her mother. Adelaide was fading before her eyes, and from a cheerful hostess who could cook anything in the world, there was only a semblance of that kind mother. She began to eat less. She had no desire to speak or have contact with people. Even her own daughter, Adelaide, often ignored her, pretending to be asleep, even though everyone knew she was awake. This took a heavy toll on Elsa's psyche and physical condition. Her grades deteriorated again. The exams were only months away. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and in 3 days Elsa's graduation was due. She was already determined to spend it without her mother, as she had dreamed. But she did not suspect that fate was preparing for her a much more difficult test. Elsa borrowed money from a friend and bought herself the cheapest dress 2 weeks before the prom. She made it look good, and it looked even better than the dresses in the bridal salon. Elsa was proud of herself. Are you ready to graduate yet? Nebu texted her at night. You know, this graduation would have brought me a lot more positive emotions if it wasn't for the situation with my mom, Elsa replied to him. I understand, and hang in there. Remember that I'm with you. However, even this support didn't save Elsa at a crucial moment. At 3 a.m., she received a call from the hospital. The tired voice of the nurse on the phone said, Your mother was very ill today. We had to perform an operation. We fear that she may not live to see the morning. Elsa jumped out of bed, and 10 minutes later she was rushing to the hospital. She rushed into the room and saw her dying mother. She was lying on the couch breathing through a tube. Mom, Elsa whispered, approaching the closest person in her life. Mom, I'm here. The cancer's about to get her, the doctor said behind her back. She may not recognize you anymore, but you try. Mommy, it's me, Elsa, your daughter, remember? She cried, clutching her mother's hand. Elsa. Adelaide marveled. Elsa, my daughter. Yes, Mommy, your daughter. Elsa replied in a trembling voice. I remember you, the woman smiled and coughed. Sweetheart, he's taking me away. Who's taking you away? Who's taking you, Mommy? God, he's already waiting for me. When I was asleep, he told me to say goodbye to you. Elsa turned away to hold back the cry that burst from her chest. Say goodbye, she smiled through the tears rolling down her cheeks. Well, let's say goodbye. Laurel, I love you. Adelaide moaned hoarsely. You could see how hard it was for her to speak and strain her voice. Mom, I love you too. Kissing her hands, her daughter said. I don't want to die. the woman sobbed in a low voice. "But you know I believe in the heavenly world. If God wants me to, I will do His will. I'm so afraid of oblivion, of this eternal darkness." "Mom, you're going to the most wonderful place. Only good people go there, and you're going to go there. It's going to be so warm and fun." "I want warmth. I'm cold." "Yes, Mommy, it will be warm and there will be no suffering. You'll meet your mommy, you'll meet your daddy. It's the most incredible place on earth." Elsa noticed that Adelaide was no longer answering. She lay with her eyes open, staring up at the ceiling. "Mom," Elsa tugged at the woman. "Mom," she switched to screaming as she continued to rock her. Elsa didn't want to accept what she saw with her own eyes, but through the piercing pain she squeezed her mother's hand and leaned into the still cold body from which her soul had fled at that moment. "Mommy," Elsa whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I love you so much." There were so many tears that the entire sheet enveloping her mother was instantly wet, as if it had just been washed. The pain Elsa felt at that moment could not be described. It felt like someone was slowly squeezing her heart. Her chest ached wildly, and she wanted to scream, but there was no strength to do so. The machine beeped sharply. The doctors rushed into the room and stopped a few centimeters from the couch on which the late Adelaide was now lying. They dared not move. Out of respect for their daughter, they stood with their hands clasped together and heard the quiet sobs of Elsa, who could not tear herself away from her mother's body. Elsa didn't know how much time had passed, minutes or hours. Someone put his cold hand on her shoulder. "Elsa, you have to go," a man's voice almost whispered. Elsa stood up, staggered, and stepped aside. 3 medics covered her mother's body with a black blanket, disconnected her from the life support machines, and took her to the morgue. Someone was whispering, saying something to Elsa's face, maybe ordering her. But she didn't react. When she was almost forcibly removed from the room, she woke up only in the waiting room. Before that, she felt as if she were in a dream. Now it was like she was alive again. "Are you okay?" the nurse sitting next to her asked. Elsa did not answer. She had no strength for anything. "Would you like a cab?" the nurse offered kindly. "If it's not too much trouble," Elsa replied. Ever since she was a child, Elsa had wondered why it always rained on mourning days. Does the weather know when to cry and suffer? On this day, standing outside the temple where her mother was being buried, Elsa thought about it. It wasn't just rain, it was a real downpour. Nabu was standing beside her, holding an umbrella. At this moment, while all the graduates were celebrating the beginning of a new life, Elsa was saying goodbye to a huge part of her former one. A coffin was carried out of the temple, carried to the hearse. Elsa never would have thought that her high school graduation would be remembered by this particular event. The pink dress she had purchased for graduation looked eerie among the black mass of people. The relatives of the late Adelaide were leering at Elsa and her outfit. "I hope at least my mom likes me dressed like this," Elsa remarked. "Your mom would like you to be in a dress like that," Nabu said confidently. "I'm sure she would love it. Or maybe I'm just too young and stupid to realize the seriousness of the situation," Elsa thought. "You know, I still can't accept the fact that I am an orphan at the age of 18. Nabu did not answer, realizing that words were useless now. Instead, he moved closer to Elsa and hugged her as tightly as he could. "I am with you," he said quietly. Adelaide was buried. A part of Elsa went underground with her forever. Things would never be the same again. Elsa will never be able to eat her mom's delicious cheesecakes or laugh with her again. There won't be those heartwarming conversations on Friday nights in the kitchen when watching a movie. Elsa will never see her mom's smile again. All of that is lost forever. Elsa walked home to the hoot and holler of drunken teenagers celebrating graduation to the clatter of fireworks and the enthusiastic shouts of her parents. She wrapped herself in a warm sweater and raced home as fast as she could. Silence. It was never like this in this apartment, except at night. And now it was almost night. So Elsa imagined that her mom had just fallen asleep and she couldn't sleep. She brewed some strong tea, took out an old album from the closet and began to leaf through page after page. Her breathing became ragged and her fists clenched with anger when Elsa saw the pendant on her grandmother's chest. "I'm there, Mom," she whispered proudly and confidently. I'm there for you where the gap is. The days of the fraud investigation passed. Everything went quiet. The investigators promised to continue the search, but Elsa already had little faith in these words. It was time to send applications to various universities. Many of her classmates decided to stay in their hometown, following the proverb where I was born there and came in handy. But this story was definitely not about Elsa. She was determined to move, and not to an ordinary city on the outskirts, but directly to the capital. Nodding. Nabu continued to rock Elsa on the swing, but was clearly upset by this news. Why do you have to go there? Stay here, he urged. What's keeping me here, or who's keeping me here? Elsa sighed. My mom is dead. I'm an orphan. What about me? Nabu remarked resentfully. Elsa paused the swing and looked at him. But I can't stay here. This place is weighing on me. Every day I see places I used to see very differently. This is where my personal tragedy happened. You're running from your feelings, Nabu suggested. Perhaps, but I will be relieved. This place will no longer weigh on me like a huge weight. Elsa, you know why I'm in pain. Why are you doing this? You're hurting me. Nabu, you know the answer too. Our feelings are not mutual. I can never look at you as a boyfriend, and you'll never be able to see me as a normal friend. So what? That's it? The end of our friendship? I don't know. I think it's the beginning of something new. The sea is cleaner and more beautiful after a storm. But I am not the sea, and you are not the storm, Nabu objected. The sea is life, and the storm is the tragedy that has befallen me. I will go away. It will be easier for me. All right, Nabu replied resentfully. Do as you please. He cast one last glance at his friend and left with his hands in his pockets. Elsa made no attempt to catch up with him. She realized that this was truly the end. Nothing could save their friendship anymore, if it could even be called friendship at all. Nabu had just been chasing her all these years. She had turned it into a game called friendship. Elsa realized she was hurting the guy badly, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't reciprocate, no matter how good he was. No matter how many good deeds he did, she would never look at Nabu any other way than as a friend. Despite her sadness, Elsa sprang into action. She knew she had many chances of getting into the capital. Her certificate shone with excellent grades, and her high U scores spoke for themselves. In addition, she knew French as well as a native speaker, all thanks to her mom, who took care of her education in time. Thank you, Mom, Elsa said, sending her documents to 5 selected universities in Moscow and looking up at the ceiling. All that remained was to wait for an answer. Elsa realized that some of the universities would definitely accept her, so she didn't waste time and started selling the apartment, which she needed to get rid of as soon as possible. Could you repeat, please? Why do you want to sell the apartment? Asked the woman at the viewing, who looked like a formidable and fair businesswoman with a straight posture and an extended neck. I'm leaving for Moscow for good, so I don't see the point in leaving my property here, Elsa explained calmly. Yes, but this apartment is not worth 10 million, 3 million at the most. Do you agree? No, Elsa answered firmly. You said that bargaining is appropriate. And this is not bargaining, but a desire for freebies. You've reduced the price by more than half. Are you out of your mind? The woman snorted and headed for the exit, tapping her heels. At this rate, you sellers won't find buyers, she said, and slammed the door loudly. However, Elsa did not suffer long with the apartment. Soon found people who were happy to buy it at an attractive price. These people turned out to be a young couple looking for a good apartment to renovate to their liking. Sergei, and the kitchen is great. Admired the girl. It will not have to be repaired. It will fit perfectly into our concept. Yes, dear, that's right, said the tired husband. When can we come over? He turned to Elsa. I'm leaving here in a week. The documents will be ready in a couple of days, she answered. First you pay half of the amount, and then another part. When I give you the keys and leave. That's fine with us, said Elsa. Then write to us as soon as the documents are ready, the girl smiled. It's a deal. 3 days later, Elsa received letters from the universities. Each of them approved her application and gave her an opportunity to get free tuition. Elsa decided to choose the most prestigious option, Moscow State University. The letter also said that she would be provided with a dormitory. So now Elsa didn't worry about housing. "Are you sure you have decided?" Nabu asked her, trying not to meet her gaze. "Sure," Elsa answered confidently, and with a smile as she left the house with her suitcases. "Elsa, before the new tenants arrive, can I talk to you?" Elsa nodded and they moved aside to the bushes. "Elsa, our last meeting didn't end well," Nabu said. "But I don't want you to hold a grudge. I don't like that kind of innuendo. And yes, I've already realized that I behaved wrongly. I shouldn't have pushed you so hard. I always knew this friendship would always be just that. A friendship. I'm so sorry." "You're a fool, Nabu. I'm not the least bit upset with you and never have been. I know you're sad to part with me, but I'm sad too. I want to leave this place, but I don't want to leave the people who live here. These bright, friendly friends, neighbors, and regular passers-by. This town will forever be etched in my memory. I will miss this house and these hometown streets. It's really hard for me to part with it, but I have to move on. I'm going into my future and I'm not going to stop." "Your mom would be very happy to hear you say that," Nabu smiled. A black car pulled up to the house, the doors opened, and the same young couple walked up to Elsa and Nabu. They were anticipating the moment when they would be handed the keys to their apartment. "Good afternoon." George said hello. "We're ready to move in now. How are you doing?" Elsa pointed to her suitcase and her car on the sidewalk. "Ready to move in too," she replied. "In that case, check the balance on your card. All the funds have already been transferred," George said. Elsa opened her phone and confirmed what the man had just said. Then she took the keys out of her pants pocket and handed them to him. "Good luck," Elsa said goodbye and headed to Nabu's car that was to take her to the airport. They made it there without any adventures. Nabu helped Elsa to check in the tickets and drop off her luggage. When they announced the boarding to New York, Elsa noticed a tear rolling down Nabu's cheek. But the guy immediately brushed it away and pretended that he was not sad at all. "Is everything all right?" Elsa asked quietly as they stood in line. "Yeah, thanks for being my friend," Nabu replied and poked her in the shoulder. "I'll still be here." "Yes, of course you will." Pulling a smile on his face, he said. They approached the stewardess who was checking tickets. "This is the end of our journey." "Goodbye," Elsa, Nabu said, and left without waiting for her friend's reaction. Elsa walked to the plane through the aisle and kept thinking why. Why is Nabu the only person who didn't turn his back on her, who helped her to the end? Elsa couldn't believe that their friendship had come to an end. But as she had suspected, it was obvious. "Welcome to MSU," said the girl who accompanied Elsa to the dormitory. "You'll be living with me and one other girl. You'll like it. We're very friendly and fun." Elsa was not eager to participate actively in student life. She didn't care about parties or assemblies. She only came here to study, and she was driven by revenge. They entered a spacious room. The walls were painted a basic beige color. They were decorated with 3 paintings and embroidery. But what Elsa liked most of all were the dream catchers above each bed. "Oh, I think I forgot to introduce myself," laughed the attendant, Elsa's roommate, Chris. "And I'm Elsa," she repeated, sitting down on the bed and marveling at the softness of the mattress. "I didn't think that this place would be so comfortable. I usually imagined a dormitory with cockroaches and dirty floors." They can be said another neighbor, sitting on her bed and filing her nails. "But not in our building. This place is really clean and orderly, so don't think you can bring guys here." "I don't," Elsa said, embarrassed. "Can you study here?" Chris changed the subject to avoid an argument, pointing to a chair by the window. "Actually, when we came here with Muse, this room looked terrible. But over the last 2 years, we've made it up in no time." "So you're already in your 3rd year?" Elsa guessed. "Yes, I guessed," Muse replied grimly, continuing to file her nails. "See that embroidery on the wall?" Chris tapped her on the shoulder. "That's my work." It didn't take long for Elsa to get used to the new place. Chris did turn out to be very friendly, just like she said she would be. But there was a problem with Muse. She didn't make contact. It seemed that she was disgusted by the mere sight of Elsa. Elsa did not understand the reasons for this dislike, but accepted the character of her neighbor. On the 1st of September, school began. Elsa did not fully understand the essence of the specialty hotel business, but she has always been attracted to the profession related to hotels and service personnel. In the future, she wanted to open a hotel herself. Every evening when tired Elsa returned from classes, she sat down at a desk, opened a textbook on financial literacy, and wrote everything she could. After 3 months of such labor, she figured out where to invest the money from the sale of the apartment. All these months she spent the minimum on food and personal hygiene products. She had about $1 million left, which had to be hidden somewhere. But Elsa decided not to mindlessly invest the money in a bank account. She went a smarter way, invested in currency. In the future, under favorable circumstances, it was possible to get much more than it was in the beginning. And since Elsa didn't really need the money yet, she took the risk. "Where is Muse?" Elsa asked when Chris entered the room. It was 11 p.m., and Muse was still not home. "She's still at work," replied a tired Chris. "We have an internship right now." "Where do you work?" "In the Hotel Mirage on Novokuznetskaya. They take only from the 3rd year. But we didn't even find out, we just needed somewhere to get an internship. To be honest, Muse and I don't plan to work in hotels. My uncle made me, for example. By the way, this uncle took us on an internship. He owns the hotel. Can't your uncle hire you?" "And me unexpectedly?" Elsa was surprised. Chris raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why you?" "But I need a job, and this would be a great option. Especially I, unlike you and Muse, want to work in hotels in the future." "Well, if that's what you want, I don't think my uncle would mind, but I'll have to ask. Let me go tomorrow and find out." "Wonderful, thank you." Elsa lay down on the bed and tried to sleep, but failed. The fragments of her mother's death and the image of that pendant reappeared in her memory. Her blood boiled with anger, but then she managed to pull herself together and shut down. "Elsa. Elsa." A familiar voice called out from the university. Elsa stopped and turned around. Chris was running towards her with some paper. The neighbor stopped, barely out of breath. My uncle, gave you permission to come for an interview." "Do you have to interview for a cleaning job?" Elsa joked. But of course Chris didn't get the joke. "A job is a job, but I'm sure you'll be hired. They are just short of staff. One show administrator quit because she was pregnant. By the way, get this, she got pregnant by a hotel employee, and they weren't even married." "I feel like my life won't be boring when I go to work at this hotel," Elsa said. "Oh, there will be so much gossip." "Thank you, Chris, I'll go there tonight." Elsa shuffled nervously from foot to foot before the interview. What was she afraid of, though? Who wouldn't pass the interview for the hall manager with 3 languages? Coming came a stern voice from behind the door. "Good afternoon, this is Elsa. Did you invite me for an interview?" She began uncertainly. "Well, why are you standing in the doorway? Come here. A hotel receptionist should not be shy about anything." Elsa smiled and sat down opposite Uncle Chris, whose name was Jan. She handed him her resume, her graduation papers, and her medical book. "So, let's see." Jan began to study the documents. After a few minutes he asked, "Do you know French?" "Yes, I've been learning it since I was a kid. I love this beautiful language," Elsa answered. Jan gave her a scrutinizing look. "Well, I will stop on your candidacy. It is better than all the others. Can you work from today? And what kind of shifts are there, night and day?" "Most students choose night shifts." "Isn't it harder?" "You don't have many visitors. You can sleep until you're called." "I'll take you to the senior administrator now. I think you'll get along," Jan said. Elsa was taken to the lobby where she was met by a young, attractive guy. Matthew explained all the rules to the new employee as Ian had instructed him to do and left to go about his business. At first, Matthew seemed like an arrogant guy. But once Elsa heard his soft, melodious voice, the impression changed. He shyly beckoned her over to him. Hi, he smiled, stammering slightly. My name is Matthew, but you've already figured that out? Yes, my name is Elsa. Nice to meet you, she answered awkwardly. Shall I tell you how things work here? Let me give you a brief tour of our hotel. First of all, look around, Matthew advised. Elsa followed his advice and looked around the lobby. It was quite large and combined 2 floors at once. The structure resembled a theater. There were balconies on the sides that went to the top, and on the first floor, a few meters from the entrance, there was a fountain. How much did they pay? She said out loud, not thinking anyone would hear her. A lot. We're an expensive hotel. A room here costs $25,000 a night, Matthew said. It's still the cheapest. $25,000 for one night? Elsa got excited. Quiet, don't shout like that. The first rule is that you can't yell at us. We always have to be polite and a little verbal, explained the guy. Do you understand? Yes, answered Elsa. They went to the second floor. This whole floor is occupied by restaurants. Here our guests hold meetings at breakfast or dinner. We have a stage over there, Matthew pointed to the far side of the room. So these balconies are for beauty? Oh, haven't you ever seen in the movies how important people go out on the balcony to discuss business? But these balconies, unlike in the movies, don't face the street, they face the lobby. I don't see anything wrong with that. The 3rd and 4th floors were reserved for rooms, and the 5th floor had suites. The regular staff was not allowed to enter there. At the end of the tour, they returned to the front desk. So, is everything okay? Matthew joked. No, I quit. Goodbye. Elsa replied sarcastically. As they stood at the counter, there was no one else. Aren't you a student? Yes? Matthew asked. Yes, I'm studying hotel management. That's why I came to work here. I had to earn money somewhere anyway. Why not combine business with pleasure? Aren't you supposed to have school at 3? No, it's a shortened day. That's why I went to the interview. I didn't think I'd be hired right away. I'm planning on working nights. When will you study and sleep then? And that won't be a problem. I know how to allocate my time, assured Elsa. You can't even manage time management. Why don't you find an easier job? I didn't come here to listen to advice, but to work. Elsa got angry. A young girl approached them. She looked like a realtor who wanted to cheat Elsa out of her apartment. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Matthew said. What do you mean? What can I do for you? Are you a hotel or something? What can you do for me? Give me a room. Elsa looked at Matthew. He was not a very polite guest, but that's often the case with those who work in the service industry. What room are you interested in? Single? Elsa joined the conversation. Young lady, do I look like a married woman? What kind of stupid questions are you asking me? Where is your manager? Call him here. No, girl, please, let's deal without a manager. Elsa calmed her down. We just need to know your wish. My wish is that you call the manager, the visitor shouted. Elsa nodded to Matthew and he left to get Darian. What kind of rude people work here? The stranger was indignant while they were waiting for the manager. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to offend you, Elsa said. At that moment, Darian had already approached them. He was dressed in a strict black suit with a tie and looked as important as this lady. Elsa was sure that they would find a common language. Good afternoon. What happened? He asked. Good? I don't think this day can be called good. Your staff are terrible people. They treated me inappropriately, ruined my mood. What kind of attitude is that, Darian? We were not rude. It's all a blatant lie, Matthew said. The woman's eyes almost popped out of her head. She played resentment and anger perfectly. The guest is always right. Matthew Darian replied sternly. He approached the woman and asked her name. Jessica, the guest replied resentfully. I am very happy to welcome you, Jessica, Darian said in a sweet voice and even bowed slightly. We are sorry that such a situation happened. We would like to express our deepest apologies and offer you one of the best rooms in our hotel." Jessica immediately broke into a smile. I guess that's what she wanted. "We'll have our staff make the arrangements right away," Darian smiled. "Yes, Matthew?" "Yes, Darian." Matthew gave Elsa a little push and began to organize the room. In a couple of minutes, everything was ready. "Have a nice vacation," Darian wished his guest. As Jessica disappeared into the elevator, Matthew rebelled. "Darian, why did you do that? Why didn't you believe us? Jessica is a very famous person. She's the one who forms opinions about hotels. Have you ever wondered why we're rated the way we are? That doesn't mean she can treat us like cattle." So Matthew, to her, "You're inferior, as crude as that sounds. And it is my duty to punish you," Darian said. "Punish you? For what?" Elsa began to resent him. "We have done literally nothing." "I have no way to check it." "You're both staying on night duty, scrubbing floors." "What am I, a maid?" Elsa was indignant. "I was hired as a junior administrator." "If necessary, you'll be a maid and cleaner and anything. Be thankful that I didn't fire you," Darian answered indifferently and left, not wanting to continue this unpleasant conversation. The hands of the clock were approaching 11 o'clock at night. Chris had already asked Elsa about her absence from the dormitory. Elsa had to answer honestly she was grounded. Elsa felt eerily uncomfortable sitting on the hard chair in the lobby. She didn't understand why she was being punished for nothing, like a schoolgirl. 15 minutes ago, Matthew had left to go to the store to get food. Silence reigned in the lobby. Only the murmuring of the fountain broke the silence. Elsa felt very ill. It must have been the lack of food in her stomach. She appeared to the circumstance that she had several millions in her account, and she was wasting her nights sitting on a horrible chair in a hotel. Not the kind of job she'd dreamed of, and Matthew was still gone. And because of the darkness, it was getting scary to be alone in such a large room. Elsa blinked a couple of times because she couldn't believe her eyes. "You're a Canadian citizen," she said, trying not to panic and pretending that everything was all right. "Yes, that's right," the man replied with an accent. He was good at impersonating a foreigner, but Elsa already understood everything. "Do you mind if I move the lamp a little closer to you to make sure it's you?" she asked. "Of course." Now Elsa was definitely sure that it was the man from the orientation. She quickly finalized everything and gave the number to the guest, who of course had changed his name. After a sleepless night, Elsa returned home to sleep it off. She didn't go to school that day. However, before she fell asleep, she called Chris to her and told her everything. "And he's at our hotel right now." "Oh, Chris." "Yes, and I need your help," Elsa whispered. "You're going on shift today, right? Here, he's staying in room 306. I want you to follow him personally and find out something. There's a reason he's staying at this hotel. I'm sure he's up to something." Chris listened to her friend very carefully and took her words seriously. The situation did look suspicious. Perhaps this man was a danger to the hotel guests and staff. She promised Elsa that she would follow him and try to find out as much information as possible without attracting too much attention. Safety was the top priority. Elsa didn't wake up until late afternoon. It was 6 o'clock on the clock. She got up because of the terrible headache that had been plaguing her for the last hour. She drank some water, swallowed some painkillers. A few minutes later, Chris burst into the room. She was worried about something. "Chris, what's wrong?" Elsa asked, seeing her friend pacing back and forth. "I'm just trying to figure out the best way to present this to you," Chris said, walking over to Elsa and sitting down next to her on the bed. "Anyway, I found out what you asked. You were right, something is up. I pretended to be a cleaning lady and went into his room. And while I was dusting, I heard him talking on the phone. At first he was speaking in some foreign language. Of course I didn't understand anything, but then I heard the phrase 'tomorrow at 7 in the conference room,' this he said in English. I have no idea who he was talking to, but that's all I found out." "Thank you, Chris," Elsa nodded. "I'll go there tomorrow." The next day, Elsa stood at the front desk and looked only in one direction the whole time, toward the conference room. "Where are you looking so intently?" Did I miss something? Matthew asked her. What time is it? Elsa asked nervously. 6:55. Any minute now. What? Any minute now. If you're talking about something dangerous, I'll be forced to alert management. No, don't you dare. Elsa shouted. At that moment, people started coming out of the conference room. Tom was among them. Elsa looked hopefully at Matthew. Cover for me, she asked, taking off her receptionist's uniform and putting on her maid's uniform. What are you doing? Matthew said indignantly. I want revenge. If you're my friend, don't get in my way, but help me. Explain it to me. One thing at a time. There's no time, I have to go. Elsa took the pre-prepared tea set and went to the hall.
Elsa's palms were sweating, but she walked, firmly realizing that this was her chance. The very moment when she could get her revenge. She didn't yet understand what she would do or how she would do it, but she knew for sure she would win. She entered the hall under the pretense of being asked to bring tea to the guests. The guards let her through.
When she entered the hall, she immediately analyzed the situation. In the very center of the round table sat Tom Mann. Some men in black suits were seated around him. Tom was saying something in bad French. Elsa couldn't make out the words, because he kept stuttering and sometimes talking nonsense. It was like the babbling of a 2-year-old child. He obviously didn't know French, it was obvious. At last Elsa could understand what they were discussing, or rather trying to discuss. It was about building a whole network of business centers in New York and Paris. All of Tom's colleagues were apparently French. You could read the bewilderment on their faces. When Tom confused words, he should have had an interpreter. But apparently there wasn't enough money for that. Elsa seized the opportunity and approached one of the Frenchmen with an offer of tea. As she leaned over to pour the tea for him, she smiled kindly and whispered quickly to him in French. Act as if I were just talking to you. This man, Tom, is not who he says he is. He's a crook. Don't make any deals with him. Elsa felt the other people in the room begin to squint at her. The Frenchman she was talking to took her advice and pretended that he hadn't heard anything, that they were just discussing tea. He smiled at Tom with the most genuine smile he was capable of. Elsa hurriedly removed herself from the hall. She had excellent hearing, and the walls were quite thin. Therefore, Elsa heard the voice of that Frenchman who said, I am very interested in your proposal. But before signing a contract with you, give me a few minutes to think it over. The Frenchman walked out of the hall and noticed Elsa signaling him from the right corner. They retreated to the staff room. It was there that Elsa decided to expose the fraudster. She took out her cell phone and began showing French various news publications. She took newspaper clippings out of her pockets and showed him a photo of her mother, who had passed away because of this madman. The Frenchman was horrified by what he saw, but there was no need to create panic. Tom might get suspicious and go into hiding. This could not be allowed to happen. He decided to go to the hotel manager. Elsa went with him to translate in case of emergency. Jan, oh my God, call the police. Elsa advised him. He'll soon get suspicious and run away. Then we'll never catch him. There's a man like that under the roof of my hotel. That would be such a blow to my reputation, John objected. All the more you should organize the capture of a criminal who destroys people's lives, said Elsa firmly. After a short thought, Jan listened to Elsa and called the police. In front of the astonished guests, the police officers handcuffed Tom and took him for questioning. The Frenchman almost kissed Elsa, trying to thank her. She saved him from such a terrible deal. Surely this crook was already up to something. The next day, when Elsa came to work, she saw a gorgeous bouquet of red roses on the table. Who is this joy to whom? She asked Matthew. It's from your French admirer, he answered. He is waiting for you in the main hall. Elsa held the bouquet to her nose and almost fainted from the fragrance. The flowers contained a note, Mademoiselle, waiting for you in the hall. It was written in French. Elsa immediately rushed to the hall to meet the Frenchman who had given her such a wonderful surprise. He was sitting on a blue sofa and looking at the floor. Are you waiting? Elsa said hello. He immediately jumped up, started kissing his savior, saying many compliments to her. They sat down on the sofa, and the Frenchman was finally able to introduce himself properly. "My name is Bernard. I am so glad that fate gave me you as a rescue. I don't know how it would have turned out if you hadn't arrived in time. The collapse of our company, the disgrace of France, would have been a real horror." Elsa was indignant, laughing at his endless exclamations. "Tell me, why do you know French so well?" he admired. "It is the first time I meet a young American woman who speaks our language as if it were her own." "Thank you," Elsa replied with a smile. "I've known French for a long time, and my mother taught it to me as a child, so I've been familiar with the language since I was in diapers. It was easy for me to learn. I'm really a native speaker now." After Elsa began to tell him the story of her family, about the tragic death of her mother, about how badly things turned out when they met this horrible man. "I can't imagine what you're experiencing," the Frenchman admitted. "But we finally managed to catch this fugitive. I'm sure he'll get a big sentence. He's cheated a lot of people." "Yes, that's his only talent," replied Elsa grimly. "I cannot know how you feel now, but I can guess how you will feel after my proposal," Bernard continued. Elsa perked up her ears. The beginning sounded interesting. "Because of these circumstances, and with your knowledge of French, I would like to invite you to an internship in France. There I will pay for you to attend university in any specialty you wish. This is a great opportunity to move there and a chance to stay there forever. Tell me, would you like to visit Paris?" Elsa's eyes lit up. "Of course I would. How could you refuse something like that?" "I knew you'd say yes. You're a very clever girl. I rarely meet such good and conscientious people. You know, there's a reason I invited you to Paris. I asked the hotel manager to give me some information about you. He told me your last name and I understood." "I know one of your relatives living in Paris," said Bernard. "Come on," hesitated Elsa. "This simply cannot be. All my relatives are in America." Although Elsa remembered about that old album and the stories of her mother. She had said that only her grandfather had survived the revolution. But what if he wasn't the only one who survived? Maybe there really were relatives left behind who ended up emigrating to France. "Oh, I see you have a mini concilium here." John smiled at them. "Allow me, Elsa, to express to you the deepest gratitude from the entire management of our hotel. You have saved our reputation." "That's right," the Frenchman confirmed with a smile. "Did you know, monsieur, that this mademoiselle has aristocratic roots?" "No way." It was Jan's turn to be amazed. "Really, Elsa?" "Well, yes, she was embarrassed. If you are interested, here." Elsa opened the gallery on her phone and showed them both a picture of the medallion and some old group family photos. "I reshot them from an album." "How interesting." Ian shook his head. "So what are you going to do now?" "I'm trying to persuade her to come to France," replied the Frenchman. "Don't doubt it." He turned to Elsa again. "I'm not just telling you all this now. I contacted your relatives as soon as I got some information. He worked as a designer, and now he's retired. I must introduce you. Go ahead, make up your mind. It's an opportunity." Elsa didn't hesitate for a second. There was nothing else holding her here. She had already said goodbye to her friends from her hometown, and in New York had not yet had time to find real friends. "I agree," she said after a moment of silence, almost shouting, which frightened the Frenchman very much. He even clutched at his heart. "You do not want to think about it. The flight's tomorrow. Can't you think of anything else?" Bernard asked her. "You don't want me to go, do you?" Elsa grinned. "You saved my business. How could I not want that? And your relative, he's already just waiting for you." "You decided so quickly?" "I didn't think it would happen so easily." Bernard was surprised. "I have nothing to look for or to wait for. I'm a free man. I'm not tied to places or people. Everyone who was dear to me has either said goodbye to me or is already in the other world," Elsa explained. "In that case, I expect you tomorrow at John F. Kennedy Airport. Don't be late. Don't be late. Don't miss your chance." After 24 hours, Elsa enjoyed the view of narrow streets and walks on the cobblestone sidewalks of Paris. The aroma of coffee and croissants was in the air. She hadn't had breakfast yet, so she was drooling at literally every smell. The French really are real cooks. The cab driver decided to show her around the city without charging her extra. He even gave her a mini tour. This is the iconic Eiffel Tower. And this is the cafe from Emily in Paris. And this is the office building of that perfume. Elsa couldn't believe she was in this fairy tale, and only a day ago she was suffering from lack of sleep somewhere in cold New York. Here the sun was shining brightly, promising a wonderful day, many wonderful day. They pulled up to a 4-story white building. Its entrance was in a courtyard, so Elsa walked on her own. But she didn't have to think about where to go or what to say. At the gate stood an old man in plaid pants and a jacket with a boatie. Elsa intuitively realized that she needed to go to him. "Good afternoon, Elsa," greeted her in French. "I am glad that you finally came and honored me with your visit. Come in." They entered through the gate and then turned left, where there was a door to the so-called entrance. Except it wasn't an entryway at all. It turned out that all 4 floors belonged to a relative from France. She was stunned to hear that. "I'm sorry, I still don't know your name," Elsa said as they entered the living room. "I used to be called Roger," the old man answered in English. "But here I decided to take a different name. For a long time now I've been Robert." "It suits you very well," Elsa complimented him. "Thank you," Robert smiled politely. He invited her to sit down on the sofa, and he began to pour tea. "I'm so glad I found you. I didn't realize I had any relatives left in America." "Just as I did not suspect of relatives in Paris," joked Elsa. "I found out about you completely by accident." "Yes, I see. Bernard told me everything. I'm sorry to startle you with such a question. But you plan to stay in Paris?" "Bernard has offered me an education here. I don't know what will happen, but I've accepted his offer. I don't know what the housing situation will be yet." "Oh, there's no question about that. I have a very cozy apartment almost in the center of Paris, also left by my ancestors. Our ancestors are very special people, I can tell. In fact, they lost a lot after the revolution, moved here, started to build a new life, working part-time here and there. In my youth, I started out as an ordinary worker. But when I was 40, I changed my profession and became a designer." "Yes, Bernard said you were a designer, a former designer. I don't have the energy to do it anymore. My grandson inherited my business and my brand. By the way, he's coming to visit me today from an important meeting. You wouldn't mind meeting him, would you?" "Of course not. I'd love to make new acquaintances." "That's fine. Now I suggest you have breakfast, and I'm sure you're very tired on the road and haven't eaten yet. It's rare to get quality food on airplanes these days." "I couldn't agree more," Elsa smiled. All day long, she and Robert talked about this and that. Elsa told him her story and how she was lucky to be here. Everything really did happen so suddenly. "I was in Paris before I knew it. And only recently I was celebrating my 18th birthday." "How quickly time flies," she said. The doorbell rang. Robert went to meet his grandson, and Elsa, meanwhile, quickly grabbed her mirror and put herself in order. "There's my grandson," Robert exclaimed happily as he escorted the embarrassed boy into the living room. "Good evening. It's a pleasure to meet such a lovely mademoiselle." Robert's grandson kissed Elsa's hand. "I'm William. My grandfather told me a lot about you. Are you Elsa?" Elsa nodded in agreement. She was a little stunned. No one had ever greeted her so gallantly before, but she would probably get used to it soon. The French love body contact. "He was buzzing me about some American relative coming to visit him. I couldn't turn down the opportunity to see you," William went on. They got to talking. It turned out that William knew Russian very well. Grandfather always wanted his grandchildren to know their roots. "You know, I've never been to America. I'd like to go there. They say it's fun there. There's something going on every day." Elsa laughed. "Yes, that's true. The rumors don't lie." As they were talking, Robert came up to them and interrupted them. He was holding a cloth bag in his hands and crying. "What's the matter with you? What's wrong? Do you need help?" Elsa was concerned. No, Robert denied. "I'm sorry. I let my feelings get the better of me. It's just that this pouch contains something that might worry you." Robert gently placed the pouch in Elsa's palm. She didn't open it right away, afraid of what she might see. She untied the black ribbon and slipped her hand into it. She fumbled for something glass or metal. Her curiosity couldn't wait any longer. She looked at what now lay in her hand. A gold pendant with a bright blue stone caused her a storm of emotion. She couldn't control her feelings and cried. It was the same pendant that turned out to be the key to all the events that had happened. It was all about that damn pendant. "Where did you get it?" she asked Robert, stammering. "My good friend Bernard gave it to me and told me to be sure to give it to you. He was given the pendant. During the investigation, the crook kept it in his safe all this time. He didn't even sell it, though he was going to. It's about time they stopped him. It was the only thing of value our family had left. Everything was either burned or looted, and this pendant was lost. At least that's what I thought until now. I am very glad that it is now returning to you as it should." "Thank you," Elsa whispered, and took this heart of the ocean, as her mother called it. From that moment on, Elsa's life took on new colors. She entered the University for International Relations, began to immerse herself in the culture of France, and her desire to see the world grew more and more. All this time she communicated with William. He turned out to be a real gentleman, invited her on dates, gave her flowers. Her first kiss was at the Eiffel Tower. What else could a girl dream of? And soon they were married. Played a loud wedding, which seemed to know the whole of Paris. Elsa was flattered by such attention. She felt special and free. The bitterness of loss faded into the background. Now in her life and priority was her family life. Several years had passed since then. Elsa walked along the rain-wet asphalt, holding the hand of her 5-year-old son Pablo. They had arrived in Russia a few hours ago. William was walking next to her. They were wearing black raincoats and holding umbrellas in their hands. "Mom, what's this for? Why couldn't I stay home?" My son whined the whole way. "It's important for each of us, dear," Elsa explained to him. "In the future, you'll realize it." She took him in her arms. So they walked faster. Soon they reached the very grave 327. It was her cemetery number. The name Adela was visible on the headstone. Because of the dirt, some of the symbols on the headstone had become illegible. However, Elsa felt even in her heart that she was in the right place. Pablo and William stayed back, and Elsa walked right up to the grave. She laid flowers and said, "Hi, Mom. I thought I'd pay you a visit. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Don't think I've forgotten. I was just building a happy family." A light breeze blew on Elsa, which she took as a sign that her mother could hear her. "Mommy, I miss you so much." Elsa cried, bowing her head. "I miss your words, your support. You know I live in Paris now. Could you become a real chef there? I'm sure that in your new life it will be just like that." Elsa wiped her tears and took a small cloth bag out of her pocket. "Mommy, I brought you something." She took a pendant out of the bag and put it next to the flowers. "Look, Mom, I found it. It came back to us. Now you can rest easy. After me, it will go to my son, your grandson." "Dad, why is Mommy crying?" "Is she sick?" Pablo yelled at his father. "No, honey, she just decided to finally let go of her past," William answered him seriously. Elsa stood up, shook off the last drops of tears, and smiled warmly at her baby. "Your grandmother sleeps eternal sleep here, Pavlik. She would be very glad to see you." "She sees me," the son suddenly answered very seriously, "there in heaven." The parents smiled at the child's directness, took their son by the hands, and went to the exit of the cemetery. Past the tall, dark fir trees, past the old and new tombstones, through the still silence. Home to their present and future. "Buddy, just take a bite." Bobby urged, but Buddy's dog turned his face away from the chicken cutlet. He didn't want to eat. Buddy was seriously ill and couldn't get up anymore, and the boy suffered for it with all his soul. After all, he had no one more dear to him than a dog. For 2 years, Bobby met Buddy, when he once again ran away from the orphanage.
But he did not sit quietly in a cozy and warm place where Aunt Mary cooked delicious borscht and baked fragrant pies for tea. Craving for adventure greatly upset his favorite teacher, Polly Patricia. Only thanks to her wild and withdrawn 3-year-old kid, who was picked up at the train station, grew up a kind and open guy. "Where have you been?" 2 days, excitedly asked Polly Patricia, and seeing a small dog behind his back, added, "Who's that?"
"That's Buddy," Bobby muttered. "He's a stray, like me. Nobody wants him and me. I'm not kicking him out."
Bobby prepared to defend his friend and even to take any punishment he could, but that didn't happen. Polly Patricia smiled.
"How skinny is he? We should feed him. Take him into the yard. Give him what's left in Aunt Mary's kitchen. I'll have Jerry the janitor build a booth. I dibs on Uncle Jerry's help in cleaning up after the dog," she said. "Okay, all right. Thank you." "Buddy, you're not getting kicked out," exclaimed a happy Bobby. "Because we need you both," said the teacher, and hugged her naughty pup. So the dog stayed at the orphanage and soon became a favorite of the children. They took turns cleaning his box, washing bowls, and cleaning up piles. The superintendent, who was against the experiment, finally gave in and admitted that Polly Patricia was right. Pets make children more responsible and kinder, better than rules and lessons. And then Buddy got sick. They tried all the inexpensive remedies, but nothing worked. The dog was getting worse and worse. "Maybe he ate something bad," Jerry suggested. "Maybe somebody kicked him. People are all kinds of people." Seeing the tears on the child's face, the janitor added, "You better go to the dog doctor. His veterinary clinic is over there. They can help you with anything." Bobby ran as fast as he could in the direction Jerry had shown him. Indeed, across the street from the drugstore was a small building with a brightly colored Dr. Woof sign. There were several people inside, with cats, dogs, even a monkey on their arms. "Can I just ask?" The boy addressed the stranger with a sheepdog with a trembling voice, and he nodded his head. In the office sat a young doctor with kind eyes. He was writing something down. "What are you worried about?" he asked. "My name is Bobby. I don't know where to start," said the boy. "My dog is sick. What do I do? He's lying there whimpering and he won't eat or drink." Bobby's lips quivered. He could feel the tears coming, and the boy clenched his fist tightly to keep from crying. The doctor saw that. "My name is Daniel John," he introduced himself. "Then we'll know each other. Who's Buddy?" "He's my dog. Actually, he's an orphanage dog. We've been giving him all sorts of belly powders, but they don't work. I think he might die." "Oh no, really?" Daniel John calmed him down. "Why don't you run down to the orphanage and get someone to bring him in? I'll examine the dog for free and do an ultrasound, x-rays, take some tests. I'll give him whatever meds I can afford at first, and then I hope you can handle it."
"Thanks, Buddy," the doctor cheered Bobby and stormed out of the office.
"Daniel John, not my name, not Buddy, not the doctor shouted after him, and he heard the queue erupt in laughter. By evening, the dog was examined. Daniel John found serious damage to his internal organs, giving him shots and prescribing a diet. The vet gave him medication and diet food. "Here, Bobby, look. It's all written here," he said. "Show this to your nurse. She can give Buddy his shots. But the dog needs surgery, and it's not going to be cheap." Daniel John named the amount. "Unfortunately, I can't take on that kind of expense," said Bobby. "My mom is very sick at home. I'm struggling to make ends meet. You know, you're going to have to find the funds yourself. You're a smart kid. I think you can handle it." When the orphanage found out how much money was needed for treatment, the teachers grabbed their heads. Of course, no one had that kind of money. Even with the combined modest salaries, teachers did not collect even half of the necessary amount. Better to put the animal to sleep and not torture it," Jerry said sullenly and looked back at Buddy. "No," said little Ollie, followed by the other girls. They could hear, for they were walking nearby. "We're not going to put anyone to sleep, but we're going to continue the treatment," said Polly Patricia suddenly. "Don't scare the children." "I'll find the money," Bobby said loudly. "I will." And he ran away from the orphanage again. "Give me a dash of gold, for Christ's sake. I need it or Buddy will die," Bobby sang in the crosswalk, playing a little harmonica. People threw money, and some stood and listened to the kid's pitiful song. "Get out of here," shouted a nimble bum and pushed Bobby's shoulder painfully. "Takes his money." "I'm not stealing." Bobby was confused and stood there like a stumbling block. Someone helped him collect the coins and bills, putting them in a pile. So he stood there with a small bag of money, just enough for a movie and ice cream.
"Boy, come here," a distinguished man in expensive clothes beckoned to Bobby.
He obediently approached, trusting the rich man's solid appearance. "Listen, what's your name?" "I'm Dinas Agor," the stranger introduced himself. I'm Bobby. Listen, Robert. Do you want to make easy and just a lot of money? He suddenly offered.
I do, but it doesn't work that way, Bobby replied, remembering his conversation with Polly Patricia, in which she had told the boys that no one would give their money away for nothing, citing terrible examples.
But I won't give you my organs, and I won't steal anything for you, he added. Denise Igor laughed. Do I look like a bandit? I'd like to offer you a deal. Let's go to a cafe, and we'll talk there. This isn't the right place. While Bobby treated everyone to cakes and hot tea, Dennis Igor began his story.
You see, brother, my wife is very ill at home.
Nobody can understand what's wrong with her. Severe weakness, dizziness, and general impotence. As they say, God did not give her children, though she wanted them very much. Your job would be to be around her constantly during the day, looking after her, helping her, reading books, just to talk about this and that. She refuses the help of a professional nurse. Will she accept you? I know she will. You could even sing her your own song. She'd love it. My wife's name is Barbara Valerie. She's kind. So what's it gonna be? What's it gonna be, Bobby? I'll give you the money as soon as you start working. Bobby was flattered that Dennis Igor was calling him by his full name. Besides, he really needed the money right away. When Bobby walked into Dennis and Barbara's house, he was amazed at the spacious room, especially the huge television. The house itself was a 3-story mansion with turrets and many rooms. Bobby wondered to himself why 2 people would live in such a huge house. After all, they had no children, not even a dog. Everywhere perfect interiors like on the pages of expensive glossy magazines, and not a single living soul. Boring. Only now did Bobby realize why Dennis Igor had asked him to be with his wife. They cautiously entered the small, bright bedroom where a young blonde woman lay on the bed, turned to face the curtained window. Barb, I've brought you an interlocutor, Denise said quietly to Igor. Bobby, go meet your hostess and get to your duties. Denise nudged Bobby, slipped an envelope of money into his jacket pocket and walked out. Bobby sneaked around, afraid to wake his ward. He walked over to the patient's bedside. He wanted to get a good look at the one being paid so well. Barbara was awake. She turned her head and looked at his guest. Her face was pale and sad. Bobby's heart clenched at the sight of such a sight. He felt sorry for Barbara, who had everything but her health. Who are you? Slightly audible, she asked. Why did he bring you here? I'm going to work here, said Bobby. I'm going to help you in everything. And this uncle, your husband, will pay me a lot of money, and then I can cure my buddy. Your what? Barbara smiled faintly. Buddy, my dog. He needs an operation of this cost, and Bobby spread his arms, the way fishermen do when they brag about the size of the fish they've caught. Barbara smiled. She definitely liked this direct and honest kid. You can call me Aunt Barb if you don't want to, or if you don't feel comfortable sitting with me. Then I'll let you go. But don't worry, I'll give you the money for the dog's treatment anyway. At least it'll help someone. Not Aunt Barb, Bobby answered firmly. I'll stay with you. Your husband has already given me some of the money. If you can, help me raise the rest. Also, it's kind of dark and stuffy in here. It's nice weather outside. You have to let some fresh air in. That's what they always told us at the orphanage, so Bobby opened the window and opened the window and opened the thick curtains, and a warm summer breeze blew into the room. Barbara smiled and propped herself up on her elbows. Bobby considered that a good sign. Look, don't waste any time. Take the money to the vet. Have him do the surgery. Tell him Barbara Valerie will pay for everything. Have the bill sent to this address. They know me well in town, Barbara said. Have you memorized what you need to say? Run and say, buddy, Bobby unbelieving his good fortune. Bobby nodded his head affirmatively and headed for the door. But suddenly he was back. He ran up to Barbara and hugged her tightly. A minute later he was gone. She got up and walked carefully to the window so that no one would see her. Bobby was nimbly flying at full speed. Barbara smiled. Today was an extra day. Thanks to this, the orphanage had brought her the joy of some boy. Uncle Jerry, the panting boy, called out, "Where's your wheelbarrow? I'm taking Buddy to surgery." He'd found the money, earned it himself. Daniel's surgery was a success. You want me to tell you it lasted a few hours? By evening, Buddy was wagging his tail happily, and the next morning, he was begging for food while he stayed in the vet's care. Bobby, on the other hand, went to work at Barbara's house. He clutched the invoice tightly in his hand. "Hello," said the sick woman. Her eyes glistened with curiosity. "Did your friend bring the bill?" "Good morning," Bobby smiled at Aunt Barbara. "Here are the receipts. Thank you so much for me and Buddy and all the boys, and this is for you from them." Barbara picked up a large folder. There were children's drawings and wishes for a speedy recovery. Tears came to her eyes. She hadn't expected such warmth from complete strangers. "Thank you, Bobby," she said quietly. "Don't cry, you'll get well too."
Bobby persuaded the sick man with all his wide, childish soul. "You'll see. Do you want me to sing you a song?"
Barbara wiped her tears with a napkin and nodded her head. "The song is cuckoo, the music is folk. The words are probably folk, too." Bobby Rajah Bobby began, "You cuckoo, cuckoo, one cuckoo and two cuckoos." When Barbara heard these simple words, her face changed. "Who sang that song to you?" I know the person who composed it. It was a friend of mine. I used to live in a village not far from here when we were about 10 years old. We went swimming with her to the river. We were having so much fun that we forgot about safe water behavior. We swam too deep. Suddenly, I was swept up in the current and pulled to the bottom. I remember running out of air. I ran out of energy, and I was so terrified that I was going to die. What if someone's hand pulled me out of the pool by my hair? I took a breath. It was my friend Ellie. She saved me, but she drowned. Drowned how? Gasped Bobby, who hadn't expected the story to end so horribly. She was swept away by the current. I had no power to help her. They never found her Barbara's side, so the parents buried an empty coffin.
It wasn't your fault. Aunt Barbara Bobby comforted her. It wasn't anyone's fault.
She looked at the boy. She felt ashamed that she had burdened him with her problems. Bobby had grown up without parents, and that was hard enough. Besides, she felt bad that she had to deceive the child by dragging him into this dirty game that Dennis was playing. In fact, Barbara was perfectly healthy, just pretending to be dying, and it wasn't the whim of a bored rich woman. Not at all. Barbara was panic-stricken by her husband, who in public was an exemplary and caring spouse, but in reality a real monster. To this day, she recalls as a terrible dream a conversation between Dennis and her close friend, who turned out to be his mistress. Then Barbara's heart sank into her heels. Barbara listened to the whole dialogue, hiding behind the open door and holding a heavy tray. "What are you going to do?" hissed a disgruntled Nastia. When Barbara came out of the living room to fetch dessert, that's when she asked to join them for dinner. "I have a plan," Dina said quietly. "Wait a little while, my dear. You'll have it all. The house, the company and her diamonds. Just be patient. I've got a poison that no forensics can see. But it doesn't work fast, so you'll have to wait. When Vaska's not dead, I'll put it in the coffee. Then there will be no odor, and the poison will work faster." "You're a genius," Nastia smiled and pinched Dennis's cheek. Barbara looked at the tray, a jug of coffee she had made herself. Even knowing I wasn't here, her hands shook. But Barbara pretended she had just walked over and tried to calm down. She was disgusted to see this evil pair of traitors determined to steal her life, and Barbara was firmly determined to get her revenge. "I've got you to help me. Are you afraid, darling? I won't give you up that easily." "I'm going to expose you," Barbara said. "Here, help yourselves. It's the best quality coffee, and it's good for your health." She poured a cup for her husband and her traitorous friend. They looked at each other meaningfully. But Barbara already knew what the murderer was thinking, and that calmed her down a little. All that remained was to eat nothing and drink nothing from her husband's hands. "I've lived," Barbara thought, and now she had to lie to everyone that she was dying. Even her parents felt sorry for her mom, but it couldn't be helped. She couldn't be put in danger. Barbara's thoughts were interrupted by Bobby. Polly Patricia was singing a song. We all know it at the orphanage. We're very fond of Polly, that's what they call her amongst themselves. She's the only reason I'm not running away for good, because I know she'll worry. And she let me take Buddy, and she helped me with the treatment and the fundraising. You'd have loved her to death. That's the Polly that drowned. Then why didn't she come home? I don't know. That's why I'd like to find out from her. Will you introduce me? Let's go with you to your Polly's, Barbara suggested. What do you mean? Let's go to Polly's. Bobby was surprised. You can barely sit up. I've got to feed you, bring you a drink. Even if I called a cab, you wouldn't be able to get down, unless I asked Dennis Igor. No, Dennis, Barbara exclaimed. I'll tell you everything, but you must keep my secret. I swear, said Bobby, and his eyes sparkled with eagerness to know the secret. I can actually walk. I'm well, but I pretend to be sick. You see, it's to keep me from getting killed for money. And who wants to kill you? The boy was horrified. My husband and his mistress. Bitter, replied Barbara. Now you know everything too, and you must keep your mouth shut.
If they find out, you and I will be in danger, just so you know. If anything happens to me, it's Denis Semenov's fault. Remember that. And then you have to tell my story to someone, but only someone you trust.
I get it, Bobby said quietly. I'll help you. Aunt Barbara, and tomorrow I'll meet my teacher. Bobby felt like a spy caught behind enemy lines. It was more of a game to him than a confusing life situation. So when Denis walked past him, the boy squinted and wagged his finger at him. What's wrong with your assistant? He almost showed me his tongue, Denis said in surprise, looking at his sick wife. That's how we play it, Barbara answered in a weak voice, worried that the boy might talk. If anything, I'll be at the country club. You won't miss me, will you? Denis asked casually. Sure, go, Barbara whispered, pretending to be exhausted, and finished her coffee. I'm exhausted. Let the boy go back to his orphanage. Denise was satisfied with her answer, quickly changed into a tracksuit, took a large bag, waved goodbye, and left for his mistress. Barbara was well aware of this. Waiting until the convertible was around the corner, She gladly got out of bed and went to the kitchen to make herself and Bobby something tasty. Luckily, Denise had absolutely no knowledge of the household and rarely looked in the refrigerator, preferring to dine at expensive restaurants, grabbing a snack on the run and paying attention to his girlfriend with a chocolate dessert. The two conspirators went to the orphanage so as not to take any chances. Barbara hailed a cab. That way she could slip unnoticed from the gaze of the ubiquitous neighbors. To do this, she had to wear wide jeans and a hoodie instead of a sweatshirt. And at the same time, she wore a baseball cap up to her eyebrows. Now skinny Barbara looked a lot like a guy. When they drove up to the Heart shelter, Barbara's heart raced. She couldn't wait to see her favorite friend, the performer, to thank her for everything, to cry on her shoulder, to beg for forgiveness. Polly Patricia was in the auditorium, dusting the piano and the floor. Barbara called her name and ran up, spreading her arms for a hug. Polly turned around and looked surprised at the young woman running toward her. Barbara nodded cheerfully to Bobby, who quickly realized that something had gone wrong. Barbara suddenly stopped abruptly and stared at Polly. She didn't recognize her friend. She didn't look like Polly at all. And her eyes were bright green, not blue. "You're not Polly, I'm sorry," Barbara breathed out and cried, unable to understand. The teacher demanded an explanation from Bobby. Then she understood. "So that's not my Polly. Aunt Mary's neighbor described her to me. Said she wrote it herself and sang it with a friend once. So you're that friend?" "Yes, I want to see her," Barbara said.
So you missed her and suffered without my help. Why is your neighbor's name Mary?
"I don't know, but we can find out. I'll write down the address, and you can go and see her. But you must buy some milk on the way. Mary can't walk." "What's the matter?" Barbara was horrified. "She was hit by a car the other day. She barely survived. The doctors diagnosed a serious hip injury. She needs an operation that costs as much as an airplane wing." "Well, there's no way they can afford that kind of money." "Poor Mary," sighed Polly Patricia. "Every day I go in and help her with her chores. She's got no one." "Well, she'll have me now," said Barbara. "It'll be all right. Let me get the address." Several hours had passed since Barbara and Bobby left the house. Denise was due back. The cab, as luck would have it, was stuck in traffic. Barbara became nervous. She was afraid that the truth about her alleged illness would come out, and then she and Bobby would be in danger. There was no telling what a pinned-down hubby might do. After all, Barbara didn't know him at all. "Who are you really?" "Dennis Semenoff," she thought. In the meantime, he came home. Not finding his wife, he rejoiced, imagining her dead body being carried out of the room. But on entering the kitchen, he was cruelly disappointed. The table was littered with various delicacies, as if the place had been overrun with this diner. 2 cups had long since gone cold, indicating that the hostess and her cunning assistant had left the house quite some time ago. But that wasn't what pissed Dennis off. More than anything else, it turned out Barbara wasn't drinking coffee from the jar he poured the poison from, but from another, identical one that she'd probably stashed somewhere. So that old hag must have gotten wind that we were trying to kill her from somewhere and knew all about it, and she pretended to be half dead. She's a bastard. And the kid seems to know it. Looking at me so slyly and defiantly, the revelation startled Dennis. What if his wife went straight to the police? He began to think frantically about what to do in that case. It was dangerous for him to leave things as they were.
5 minutes later, the front door opened. Barbara and Bobby began to make their way to the second floor, where she was supposed to lie on the bed and make a dying face. But they didn't succeed. When the conspirators turned on the light in the room, they both shrieked. In a rocking chair beside the empty bed sat Dennis and glared angrily at the entrance. "Well, Barbara, this is the end of your game," his husband hissed, narrowing his eyes like a snake. "And what did you mean to prove by that? That your husband is an idiot? Or did you want to show you were smarter than everyone else? Make fun of me?"
"You know what? Don't yell in front of the baby," Barbara said dryly. It suddenly helped her to curb her fear by being angry with her husband, so it didn't matter anymore. "You wanted to kill me so you could steal the firm and marry Nancy." "Well, that's a lie and your speculation." Dennis started to deny it. "You can't prove anything." "I will," Barbara said firmly, looking straight into her husband's eyes. "How do you know I don't have proof?" Barbara was bluffing, of course. But Dennis didn't know that, so he lost his temper. "Yeah, I'm sick of you. You care about one job and I don't. You didn't even have children with me. You've never had time for anything. But Nancy promised at least 2, a boy and a girl, and she takes care of me. Your prenup was clever. In case of infidelity, everything goes to the other half, and I don't want to be left with nothing. You left me no choice. Veriara, the only thing left was to get rid of you quietly, poison you, wait for you to die. And I guess you found out all about the poison in the coffee. But so blame yourself." Dennis Eager stood up and stalked toward her with a menacing look. All Barbara Valerie could do was yell, "Bobby, run, get the hell out of here, you puppy." "I ain't paying you nothing," Dennis Eager yelled. Bobby turned on the recorder on his cell phone that Barbara Valerie had given him, slipped it into his pocket, and walked quickly to the door as the woman had instructed. Behind him there was swearing and china cups banging against the floor. Bobby stepped away from the house and called the police. When the front desk heard exactly where the unknown kid was calling for an outfit, they not only didn't believe him, but threatened to penalize him for disorderly conduct if it happened again. Dennis Semenoff's reputation as a decent businessman had never once failed him. Bobby was upset that Barbara's deception had been exposed and now she was in danger. But on the other hand, he was glad that she would finally find her missing friend. And he didn't need any more money from Dennis, because Jack the cat was almost healthy thanks to Barbara and Daniel John, and that warmed the soul of a child who was more worried about others than himself. Visits to cats and veterinary clinics. Bobby went to the orphanage where Polly Patricia was waiting for him. So, did you go to Mary's? How did it go? No. We didn't make it, Bobby sighed. Aunt Barbara and her husband had a fight because she didn't die like he wanted, and he chased me away. How is that possible? I've heard that Dennis Semenoff is a decent man, so please don't make things up. Polly Patricia was perplexed. Okay, don't worry about it. You'll go and see her tomorrow and check on her. How are you doing? Go have dinner. Aunt Mary made waffles with condensed milk today. Bobby woke up early the next morning, anxious to see Barbara and make sure she was all right. The dining room was still empty, but the tables were already set. After a quick breakfast, Bobby ran to Barbara's house. It was only a couple of blocks away. When he got to the gate, he was surprised to find it ajar. As he stepped through the massive doors, he found that the patio was open as well. What kind of open house is this? Bobby said aloud. Hey, is anybody home? Aunt Barbara, Dennis eager, but no one answered. After running through the house from bottom to top, Bobby waddled back inside. Some unexplainable feeling was pressing on his chest, rumbling inside him as if he was short of air. The children from the orphanage were already playing on the playground and having fun, but Bobby didn't care about them. He retired to the break room and turned on the TV machine. And now for the breaking city news announcer tonight, Barbara Semenova, a well-known businesswoman and the main philanthropist of our city, committed suicide. She jumped off a bridge into the river and drowned. The body is still looking for rescuers, but except for her clothes, have not yet found anything. The inconsolable husband reported that Barbara was fighting an incurable disease, but despairing went to extreme measures. The funeral will be held on Friday. Now for some other news, no. That's not true. She didn't jump off the bridge. He killed her. Bobby screamed out of shock. Grief choked his heart. What's the matter with you, kid? Polly Patricia came running into the room. Why did you pass out? Did you scare me? Did Barbara's husband kill her? Bobby repeated. He wanted to poison her, and now he's killed her altogether. Murderer, what on earth are you talking about? Calm down, complained the tutor. You're wrong. It is not easy to kill a man. What kind of animal would you have to be to raise a hand against a woman? And Dennis Semenoff is a decent man. You're just very upset. Bobby realized he was being disbelieved again. That was hard to take. There's no use calling the police. They might send him to the juvenile hall. Who would listen to him? And then Daniel came to mind, the animal doctor. What if we told him? Daniel John, help. Bobby came running into the vet's office, out of breath. Trust me, please. And he told his story straight to the point, without leaving out a single detail. And Daniel seemed to believe him. So show me where Barbara lives. Because I'm not from around here. I don't know my way around town yet. When they reached the house, the door to the terrace was already closed. Bobby ran around, listening to every rustle behind the wall. Suddenly he heard a low thud. It sounded like someone tap dancing somewhere underground. Daniel John, look, what's that? Bobby called out. It's Morse code. Someone's asking for help. There are people in the house. All right, Bobby, stand back, Daniel commanded. With a hard kick, he kicked open the door to the terrace. They walked toward the sound, which was getting stronger. The door to the basement was padlocked and propped up with a board for good measure. But Daniel made it through. When he opened the door, dampness and darkness enveloped them. The light bulb was out, so he had to turn on the flashlight on his phone. Someone was mooing in the darkness and kept pounding hard on the pipe with their heels. It was Barbara. Her hands and feet were bound tightly and her mouth was covered with a gag.
Aunt Barbara, Bobby rushed to her and hugged her. Are you alive? I was so afraid you were really dead. They said you drowned.
Daniel untied the captive and brought her out into the light. Hello, I'm a friend of Bobby's, he said, and was embarrassed. I'm sorry, Barbara. I kicked the door in here. I'll make it up to you later.
Hello, Barbara stared into the blue eyes of her savior and couldn't find anything else to say.
Hey, Bobby reminded himself, hugging them both. Let's get out of here. What if your crazy husband comes in with a gun? He won't. He's probably at the airport by now, Barbara said tiredly. He left me to starve to death, and he withdrew all our money and is trying to escape abroad. He's not going to make it, Daniel grinned. I'll call my friend the investigator and tell him everything.
I remember, Bobby exclaimed, when Dennis Ego scolded me and Aunt Barbara. I recorded his conversation and he confessed everything.
Oh, but you're a detective, Daniel laughed. Good for you. You didn't hesitate. That'll help. While Daniel dealt with the capture of Barbara's devious husband, she decided to thank her saviors with dinner. Besides, she needed to calm down. A whole day without food or water was taking its toll. So when Daniel returned, they were treated to a sumptuous meal. Daniel, John, and Barbara Valerie hit it off right away. That pleased Bobby, who liked the vet. If a stranger walked into their dining room at that moment, he would have thought they were a friendly family having dinner and discussing how their day was going. Daniel was telling some funny story from his practice. Suddenly, Bobby blurted out, "I wish you two were married." There was an awkward silence, and he realized he'd said too much. But Daniel mentally thanked him. He'd liked the sweet and fragile Barbara at first sight. The silence was interrupted by a phone call. "Daniel, they caught your fugitive," the investigator reported. "He got him right off the plane, the bastard. Denny's everything. We need a confrontation. Come tomorrow. Semyonova and the kid in the ward have been stolen." Now Barbara could breathe easy. Her life didn't seem to be in any danger, but she couldn't sleep at night. She dreamed of an enraged Dennis with an axe, then little Polly's little girl being carried away by the river. And in the morning she went to the very same address to meet her childhood friend. The door was opened by a young woman in a wheelchair. "Hello, what did you want?" she asked idly, looking somewhere past Barbara. "Polly, it's me," Barbara the visitor said quietly. "You don't remember me?" The woman shuddered and turned pale. It had been a long time since she had been called by her real name.
She gazed into Barbara's face. "Yes, I recognize you. You were a childhood friend of mine," Barbara whispered softly. "Polly, have you come?" She rushed to Polly's lap and hugged and heaved her. Both sobbed for the joy of meeting her and for the grief they had both suffered.
After they had calmed down, the women sat straight in the hallway holding hands for a long time. Then Barbara helped Polly into a chair and sat down beside her. Tell me everything," she begged her friend. "When I was swept away by the current, I tried desperately to survive, tried to get out of the current somehow. And then my strength ran out and I lost consciousness. I only remember being pulled out of the water by strong male hands. It was a gypsy named Peter. His tabor was not far from the shore. Peter was fishing and saw me drowning. That's how I ended up living with the gypsies. I must have hit my head hard because I couldn't remember anything about myself. They gave me the name Mary, and that's how I became Mary Gypsy. I didn't go to school, wandered around with the gypsy kids, begging for money from passersby. And you know, I liked that kind of life. Once, when I was standing at a crosswalk, a woman came up to me. She was surprised to see a blonde girl together with the Roma, and she called the police. I was taken to an orphanage, leaving that name behind, a name I never remembered. My past came to me in a dream. 10 years later, I remembered everything. My parents, you, and my childhood. I was studying at the institute at the time. I rushed to my native village, but no one was waiting for me there. My dad and mom had died. Strangers had been living in the apartment for a long time. So she remained alone with her grief and this memory, which she no longer needed. "Why didn't you find me?" Barbara asked excitedly. "I would have been glad to know that you were alive and I would have helped you." "I looked," replied Polly, grinning bitterly. "But you had no one at home. The neighbor threw me out, said you'd gone to town."
"Where did she say you'd gone to?" "She didn't tell the truth," Barbara said, horrified. "I was the one who lived in the city, but my parents stayed in the village. I see that neighbor always disliked my mother and was jealous of her, but it doesn't matter." "Hey, what do the doctors say?"
"They said there's a slim chance. It's been too long since that rich guy Dennis Semenov made a pass at me and threatened to blame me if I told anyone. He gave me money for the cheapest medicine and drove off.
Barbara turned pale.
And this Semenov is now called Dennis." "Yes, that's right," Polly answered. "A tall brunette. And how do you know him?" "He's my husband," said Barbara. "You know, he wanted to kill me. My lawyers already started divorce proceedings against him. By the way, Dennis is in jail. I'm on my way to the coroner's office right now, and I'll take you with me. You'll tell him everything. He should be punished on all counts. In fact, from now on, you're going to live with me until you get better. Then we'll see."
"Do you have enough room for me?" "I'm in a wheelchair," said Polly, worried. "It'll be all right," Barbara smiled. Dennis was frightened when he saw both of his victims in front of him. Polly was shaking with fear too, but Barbara took her hand and squeezed it tightly, supporting her friend, and Polly told the police everything due to the newly discovered circumstances. Dennis had another criminal case thrown at him, which meant that he would not be free for a long time.
Barbara and Polly were released. When Polly saw the house she was to live in, she was almost speechless. It was a luxurious mansion in a verdant garden, as if it had come from an artist's painting. From the excess of feelings, the guest cried. "Oh, my dear friend," Barbara soothed her. "Now you are in this house too. You will soon walk on this lawn with your own feet." Barbara kept her word. Polly was operated on a week later. Her friend insisted that Polly be rehabilitated in the mansion, not in a hospital bed. Barbara hired the best rehabilitator and nurse for this purpose. A few months later, Polly was gingerly taking her first steps. By her side were Barbara and Bobby Buddy, who loved Polly with all his heart and wanted to lick her nose every time. It was a great help in her recovery. "You look sad," Barbara said. "Look, you're doing well, and life's getting better. What's wrong?" You know, I didn't tell you everything, Polly confessed to her friend. I didn't want to dump all my problems on you. I look at Bobby and I think of my daughter, Jennifer. What? Barbara was surprised. You have a daughter? Yes, but she was taken from me by my husband and my mother-in-law, Laura Pauline. That woman immediately disliked me because I was poor as a church mouse. She wanted the best for her son, and he chose me. Then Jenny was born and George went off on a bender. They took the baby away from me in the divorce, said mean things about me in court, scared my daughter. Now they won't even let us see each other. What a nightmare. But we're not going to let it go, Barbara exclaimed, so I'm calling my lawyer. Let's get our daughter back. So Barbara decided to visit her friend's neglectful relatives, but for that she needed Daniel. Their relationship was already in full swing, and with him to go, George was not afraid at all. She was protected by her lover when Barbara's expensive foreign car driven by Daniel pulled up to Polly's ex-husband's house. Laura Pauline spotted them through the window at once, but assumed the stern look of a businesswoman. Barbara knocked decisively. She knew how to talk to people like that. Daniel was already standing behind her, posing as a bodyguard. The door was opened by her mother, with George peering timidly behind her. Is that who's running things around here? Barbara thought. She said aloud. Hello, is this the Konyukova residence? I'm looking for George Andreevich. Yes, here the landlady replied warily. What did you want from him? I'll only talk to him. And who are you? I beg your pardon, Barbara said. I'm Polly Konyukova's representative. Hello, said a middle-aged man, coming out of the back of the house. What does she want? Don't you understand? Barbara was surprised. You deprived her of her parental rights and the opportunity to raise her own daughter. When my client was in a defenseless position, or rather lying in the hospital after the accident, I am authorized to withdraw the court decision, as well as to file a counterclaim, thanks to which you will not only give the child, but also pay a large sum of money for moral suffering caused to her. And I can also bring the case to criminal punishment. As they say, if there's a man, there's an article. So what are we going to talk about here on the doorstep? Mom, the cowardly son called out.
And immediately Laura Pauline, as if she were a dear guest, began to call Barbara and Daniel into the house. A crowd of onlookers had already gathered around them.
Come in, make yourselves comfortable. You're the hostess here. I'll organize some tea. We don't mind making a deal. Why start a criminal case right away? My son is a good man, he hasn't broken any laws. We'll find out, Barbara said dryly. And if George doesn't mind, he can write it here.
Barbara handed him the agreement, which stated that Jennifer would be taken into her mother's custody and that George would drop his lawsuit for termination of his wife's parental rights. A terrified George signed it.
Where's the baby? Barbara asked. Laura Pauline brought in a skinny, blonde-haired girl who looked exactly like Polly when she was a baby. Do you want to go to Mommy's? Barbara asked Jennifer. Yes, I do. I miss her so much, Jennifer shouted and rushed to Barbara, seeking protection from the strange woman, and they're hurting me. What do you mean they're hurting you? Barbara exclaimed. Daniel, call the police. The police arrived and recorded the beatings in the child's testimony. Barbara and Daniel were witnesses. George's parental rights had been terminated. Now he had a taste of justice. His mother only cursed her hated daughter-in-law. Mommy Jennifer ran up to Polly as she was doing calisthenics with her trainer. Polly couldn't believe her eyes. She jumped up, but staggered. Daniel held her up. Everyone cried. The picture of the reunion of inseparable mother and child left no one indifferent. Buddy lay beside Polly and touched her with his paw. Bobby stood at a distance and watched enviously as the strange girl found her mother. Barbara came up to him and whispered softly, "Do you want to be my son?" Bobby looked up at her with eyes full of tears. "I'd love to have a mom like you." "Well, then, let's hug," Barbara suggested to Valerie. "I love you so much." And in the evening, they decided to celebrate the arrival of Jennifer to their extended family and the acquisition of Bobby and Mom. Daniel John tried the hardest. When everyone was seated at the table on the terrace, he turned to Barbara Valerie and said, "My friends, I ask you to be witnesses of my happiness. Barbara Valerie, you will be my wife." And Daniel John handed her the ring. Barbara Valerie was not ready for such an event, but happily said yes, and Bobby clapped his hands with happiness. "Congratulations," Jennifer told him. "Now you have both a daddy and a mommy." After dinner, the children went to play in the clearing, and the adults sat at the table and talked for a long time, the more so because there were a lot of common topics. Meanwhile, quick Bobby and quiet Jennifer quickly found a common language, and the boy decided to show the new girl all his secret places where he liked to hide. One of them was an old abandoned house not far from Barbara Valerie's mansion. It was there that he took his curious girlfriend. "It looks like a bandit's den," he boasted. "Look, there are even old boats here. We could go fishing." "Oh, what's the stove like?" Jennifer marveled. "Your fairy tales."
"I'll bring the dolls in here and make a house for them," she said. Bobby wanted to reply that it wasn't a dollhouse, but a very real pirate fort, but he didn't have time. The children heard a thud, as if something heavy had fallen. and smelled the acrid odor of smoke. It was the house rebuildings burning. "We've got to get away," shouted Bobby, "but there's somebody out there." "I heard a strange sound," insisted Jennifer. "What if there's a dog in there that can't get out?"
Bobby was frightened that it might have been arson and rushed into the vegetable garden, which was already taking fire. But it wasn't the dog. "Jennifer, help," shouted the girl. Jennifer came running to the call and was stunned with shock. Before her lay a puny little grandfather whom Bobby was endeavoring to drag by the legs. "Grab his arms. Let's carry him," Bobby commanded, and the room was already filling with smoke. The fire was spreading fast. The boys were coughing. It was difficult to get the though small but heavy grandfather out. "Where's the exit?" Jennifer shouted. "I don't know," answered Bobby. "Pull." "Come on." Suddenly the boys were pulled outside by Daniel John's strong arms. "Wait here. And don't go in the house," he said menacingly, and rushed inside. The children dared not disobey him and sat obediently at a safe distance. In a minute, Daniel John carried the haggard stranger out in his arms. The clothes and face of both were covered in soot. Daniel John brought the tramp to his senses. Grandpa opened his eyes and looked at his rescuer in surprise. "Where? Who am I?" He was clearly ill. Barbara Valerie and Polly Patricia were already running toward the cabin and had called the fire department. And soon, as Grandpa was being taken to the hospital, he suddenly looked at Polly Patricia and said, "Daughter, won't you leave me?" Polly Patricia cried with surprise. She had not heard herself called that for a long time, and she went with her grandfather in full determination to take him to her. She could not leave the unfortunate man to his fate, as had once happened to her. The doctors did their best to restore the patient's memory, and the unfortunate grandfather slowly began to remember everything. Now he knew where he came from, and that his name was Michael Arcady. He had Polly Patricia by his side at all times. Michael Arcady said to Polly Patricia, "You should go home." "I'm not comfortable. What are you?" "Uncle Michael, I'm not leaving you. Let's go home together. You don't have to suffer alone." Barbara Valerie said, "We'll all live together." "You have a family now," Polly reassured him. At the word family, Michael Arcady's face changed. "But I have a son who has forgotten the common people. He's gotten too high and arrogant." "That kind of thing," he worried. "And so how did you end up in an abandoned house?" Polly Patricia asked. "I wanted to see my son with one eye. But on the way I was robbed by some subhumans, knocked on the head, and had all my money taken. I don't remember how I got to that house and what happened to the fire. If it wasn't for the guys, we wouldn't be talking right now. They're going to help find my son," Uncle Michael replied. "Don't worry, Uncle Michael. Everything will be fine," Daniel promised John. Barbara Valerie and Daniel John and the boys were getting the room ready for the new tenant. Barbara was pleased to notice that her family was growing quickly. A week later, Michael's son Michael Arcady showed up at the hospital. A young man in an expensive suit walked into the room with 2 security guards. He looked worried. "Father, how could it be?" he exclaimed. "I'm sorry, Father. I was a fool. Polly Patricia called and told me you almost died." Michael Arcady, with trembling arms, put his arms around his son and wept. "Found me, son." Polly left the room to let them talk privately. She stood at the open window and enjoyed the fresh breeze. Suddenly someone touched her shoulder. It was Maxim. "Thank you for taking care of my father. Not everyone could do that. Especially me. I was being selfish. What can I do in gratitude?" "You don't need to do anything," Polly smiled. "Just be a good son. I've grown attached to Uncle Michael. Don't deprive me of his companionship. He wants to live with us. But if you object, tell him." "Let him live where he's comfortable," Maxim agreed. "I hope he'll want to move in with me later, but I don't seem to have as much fun as you do. My father told me how friendly you are. I envy you. You should come visit us. Uncle Michael will be glad." Polly understood Maxim and was grateful to him for it. They did not notice how happy Michael's grandfather was watching them and asked his son to walk Polly home, promising that nothing would happen to her.
"Go and get some rest. There's no use fiddling with an old man. I'm still in my right mind," Michael Arcady said, as he walked his favorite.
Uncle Michael hoped that the spark in his son's eyes at the sight of sweet Polly would grow into something more and his child would find marital happiness, and so it did. All the while Michael Arcady was recovering in the hospital, Maxim was living at Barbara Valerie's house.
Having sent his guards home to another city, where he came from, Max temporarily settled in the mansion. A favor, the house had many rooms and could accommodate many guests. Now the house was filled with voices and noise in the kitchen. Everyone was gathering in the dining room for breakfast. It seemed that the whole family lived in the house, which delighted the hostess.
At first Max was surprised by the abundance of friendliness and openness of new acquaintances, but then quickly joined the family and was no longer bored. He enjoyed the antics of the children and even the barking of Buddy, the dog who greeted him after work. Max had decided to move his office closer to Barbara's house, where his father seemed to have shed the extra years and become more active. Michael Arcady's eyes glistened with joy, and the children kept Grandpa busy. "Grandpa, come to the river with us," Bobby begged. "You promised you'd teach me how to fish, didn't you?" Michael Arcady had long dreamed of grandchildren. His son Max was so busy that he didn't even have a family. However, Everyone noticed that between Max and Polly began a romantic relationship. This was realized even by the children, who shouted to them, "The bride and groom are coming," and kicked out poor Polly in the paint. You can't fool a child's mind. Max announced to everyone that he intended to marry Polly since Daniel and Barbara had also decided to legalize their relationship. It was decided at a big family council to have a double wedding. "Here's the joy," shrieks from Bobby and Jennifer and loud cheers from the two happy couples. Michael Arcady gave the grand speech. Then all evening long, music blasted from Barbara's garden, caressing the ears. Neighbors would drop in to see what was so interesting going on in a house that had previously been closed. But when they learned the reason, they heartily congratulated the young, sincerely rejoicing at the pleasant changes. It turned out that none of them loved Dennis. A month later, a big wedding, to which were invited all the neighbors, friends, and colleagues. There was a huge marquee in the garden of Barbara's house. Two beautiful brides and their groomsmen adorned the presidium of one large table, which was bursting with treats. Beside them sat parents and children, congratulating the young ones and giving their blessing. Only Polly had no father and mother. There were tears in her eyes. Michael Arcady sat down next to her and hugged his daughter-in-law. "Daughter, don't cry, you have us. You're the closest thing I have to family, honey, and I won't let anyone hurt you," he said. "Thank you," said Polly, resting her head on his shoulder. She was happy, for she had a family around her, a daughter, a loving husband, and a father who would do anything for her. From behind her, someone's hand fell gently on her shoulder. It was Barbara, who was like a sister to her.